Welcome back, Webtoon fam. Zaiden's here. Let's dive straight into this epic pulse-pounding saga. Not everyone was lucky enough to rest in peace. Look at the classic undead. They ditched the whole life cycle. Once they popped up in one of the many worlds, they steamrolled an entire dimension. Earth was next on their list. But when they showed up, their plan went south fast. All because of one guy they just couldn't kill. Some average-looking dude turned out to be an immortal freak coming back to life over and over. Even death had no lead on him. But let's rewind a few years to a chill New Year's Eve. It was quiet for the city, but not for our guy. After gaming and boozing all day, he was greeted by his little sister's nagging. He knew she was just worried, so he didn't talk back and just bailed to his room. Even alone, he knew she was right. He felt like total trash. He didn't even know why he was wasting his prime years like a loser. As he drifted off, he thought how cool it'd be if life was just a video game. Everything would finally make sense. That night, while Kang-hyun was out cold, the Haken dimension tried to sync with Earth. Luckily, Earth's defenses bottlenecked the connection to buy some time. A training program kicked in to prep anyone who could fight off the invaders later. It felt like he'd only closed his eyes for a second, but then a massive jolt shocked the hero awake. He wasn't in his bed anymore. He was in some empty white void. Suddenly, a game window popped up and welcomed him to the tutorial. A full awakening was promised at the end of it. At first, our hero was just dazed by the info dump, but then he figured it was just a dream, and he could finally get to experience a game not from the screen. But when he saw the stuff about saving Earth, he stopped on his tracks for a bit. The tutorial started simple: cross the bridge without dying. The system window vanished, and Kang-hyun looked down to see he was on a tiny bridge over a massive lake of lava. And he wasn't alone. People were losing their minds because they were just in bed a second ago. Just as he started thinking this dream was getting weird, he saw his sister. She was looking around terrified and repeating to him what her system window said. She was convinced this was real because the heat and the voices felt too real. Kang-hyun still played it off as a dream and decided to move. The worst that could happen was waking up, right? But then someone plummeted on his left. A guy screamed like crazy as he burned alive in the lava. A few seconds later, the screaming stopped, and everyone felt that cold chill in their chest. Only then did Kang-hyun realize this was real. His body started shaking like a leaf. The guy's death snapped Kang-hyun out of it, and she dropped to all fours to keep her balance. The hero did the same, and they started crawling forward. His sister kept telling him this was way too real for a dream. Suddenly, Kang-hyun started crying. He tried to hide in his dream theory, but the fear finally paralyzed him. He just slumped there, thinking he'd wake up if he did nothing. But then a system alert flashed. Since they were lagging, the difficulty spiked. A deafening crack echoed as the rocks behind them exploded. The bridges started crumbling fast. Everyone bolted to survive. Kang-hyun forgot his fear and sprinted after his sister, who was running like hell. The end was right there, almost over. But then he saw something above her. The bridge over her head started falling apart, and rocks were about to crush her. Big brother instincts kicked in. He jumped from his bridge to hers and tackled her toward the platform. Pure luck kept them both alive. Before they could breathe, the system congratulated them on clearing the first trial. A stat window popped up. Kang-hyun didn't get the whole strength and agility thing, but it clicked for our hero instantly. He was totally wiped, but he had to see his stats. Then he suddenly jolted awake in his own bed. Was it all just a dream? He checked the web and saw thousands of posts about the same dream. Or was it one giant shared nightmare? Meanwhile, the countdown for the full sync between Haken and Earth was already under 5 years. Over breakfast, Kang-hyun and his sister figured out that this madness didn't just hit family, but the entire planet. The whole world shared the exact same dream. The good news was that anyone who died in the dream didn't actually drop dead or get hurt in real life. Kang-hyun got major chills from that. Even if people weren't hurting for real, they were definitely messed up in the head. Suddenly, chaos broke out in the streets, and our guy went to see what was up. It was total carnage out there. People were brawling over groceries, launching protests, and diving into straight-up vandalism and looting. Obviously, Kang-hyun wasn't going to look for a job today, since staying home was way safer. By evening, the street chaos died down, and order was somehow restored in just one day. That night, the hero was dragged back into the tutorial. It was time for the second trial. Now he finally got to check his stat table in detail. The info wasn't super helpful since he had nothing to compare it to. What really caught his eye was his special skill called resurrection. This let him come back to life 24 hours after dying at a spot he picked. But a cheat code like that had a catch. His level would drop, and his skills would get nerfed for a day. On the bright side, the tutorial waived all those penalties for now. Feeling himself, Kang-hyun decided to jump into stage 2. He picked a mace for high damage and managed to take down a goblin he ran into. His hands were shaking from the strain, and he knew he only won because he had the element of surprise. Plus, the realization that he just ended a sentient being didn't feel great. Of course it couldn't be that easy. A second goblin slowly stepped out from around a corner. This one looked way more grizzled than the last guy. Only then did the hero realize there were two of them from the start. Even worse, this goblin's sword was way longer than his mace. To be honest, Kang Hyun didn't stand a chance. His body wasn't built for physical combat, and the mace left him wide open every time he swung. Before long he was disarmed, wounded, and barely conscious. But the monster didn't kill him right away. Instead, it started dragging the hero somewhere. The goblin dragged him back to its camp, and together with its buddies, slowly tortured him until Kang Hyun bled out. In the morning, Kang Ah-hyun wasn't woken up by an alarm, but by her brother's gut-wrenching scream. She found him on the bed staring at nothing and biting his nails raw while shaking with pure terror. She made him some tea to chill him out, and he told her about the horrors he'd faced. The girl had died in the dream too, but it wasn't nearly as long or painful. She was just glad he was mentally tough enough, since a lot of other participants were already hitting up shrinks for help. Plus, anyone who died in the first stage didn't get summoned for the second. That news actually calmed Kang Hyun down. He wouldn't have to live through that nightmare again. Right? Not a chance. That night he ended up right back in stage 2. The system claimed there was an error during his last run, so he got a do-over. To say Kang Hyun was pissed is an understatement, and the cave walls definitely learned some new curse words that night. Trying to just wait it out and wake up back home did zero for him. Nothing left to do, so the hero dragged himself up to meet his fate. Just like before, weapon racks were waiting for him at the fortress gates. This time he decided to play it smart. Armed with a spear and a crossbow, he went on the hunt. Unfortunately, your first ever arrow rarely hits the mark. In Kang Hyun's case, the element of surprise was trashed, and he just ended up making the goblin mad. But screw it, it was too late to back down now. He grabbed his spear and charged. Circling around the big guy, he managed to take out the weaker one first. But then everything went sideways again. The spear got stuck in the monster's chest. Like some slow-motion horror movie, Kang Hyun watched as the second goblin lunged. Waking up in a cold sweat, the hero was actually relieved that at least this time they killed him instantly. The next day he was summoned back yet again. This time he prepped better by at least watching some sword training videos beforehand. When he faced the monsters this time, he had a manic grin of pure desperation on his face. Of course he failed again. When Kang Ah-hyun heard the screaming and found her brother muttering to himself in the dark, she wasn't so sure about his sanity anymore. The next night, the hero decided to just grind sword practice, since that was one way to level up his mastery. After hours of swinging at nothing, his stamina only went up by a single point. Kang Hyun stared at his stat window, hoping for a fix, and then he noticed a bonus stat point from clearing the first stage. Dumping it into strength, he felt ready to finally get his revenge on those goblins. Too bad he was so wiped from training that he didn't even land a solid hit before they took him out. For the next several days he went full-on training mode. By the 6th try he could handle the first 2 goblins, but the problem was there were way more of them in the forest. Kang Hyun just didn't have the raw power or the moves. During the 7th attempt, as the hero slumped to the ground exhausted from training, a system window suddenly popped up. Kang Hyun couldn't believe his eyes. His grind finally paid off. Thanks to his sheer persistence, he unlocked a new skill called swordsmanship. This skill would let him land much more precise hits, and even a small edge like that might be enough to finally crush those monsters. There were 5 goblins in total on this stage, and the 2 at the start were the bottom of the barrel. Thanks to his new skill, the hero could actually predict where the enemy was aiming, which made things way easier. At one point, exhaustion started catching up, but he managed to duck right under a monster's swing. He blinded the freak with some dust, then grabbed a rock and bashed its head in for the finishing blow. Finally, that Groundhog Day nightmare was over. That morning, our guy was in a killer mood and even decided to whip up some breakfast, but then the system dropped a bombshell on him and Kang Ah-hyun. Basic training was done and some people could now use the system in the real world. To top it off, they looked out the window and saw a gate had spawned right under their balcony. These things were popping up all over the globe, but only the awakened could step inside, and they only had a limited window to clear them. Chaos went into overdrive again, so the siblings decided to just bunker down in their apartment. The ones who finished training were getting drafted to clear these gates to get used to the front lines. It turned out Kang Hyun couldn't even use the system yet because he was technically still in the tutorial, unlike some others. But this time he was actually confident. He knew he had enough gas in the tank to blast through the next stages. The goal for Stage 3 was to take down the Gurkha chief. To help him out, the system gave Hero a camouflage suit, and finally unlocked his inventory. A shabby longsword had never seen so much joy on its owner's face. Sticking to the system's stealth tactics, the hero spent 10 grueling hours crawling all the way to the monster village. Only 2 guards stood outside the chief's wigwam, and Kang Hyun seriously considered just brute forcing his way in. But suddenly a Gurkha approached. This stopped his train of thought, making him hold his breath. Luckily, it was a false alarm. The monster just needed to take a leak, and it happened to be right onto Hero's head. Despite the lack of actual danger, the decision was made right then and there. Unable to stomach such an insult, the hero charged forward with his sword raised. He took down the first monster in seconds, but the rest of the camp immediately sounded the alarm. Within moments, the hero was surrounded by tribal warriors. Kang Hyun let out a roar claiming he was ready to fight, which triggered a new skill called Lion's Roar. Of course he lost the battle, but not the war. He came back the next day fired up and activated his new skill right away. It nerfed the enemy's stats and morale, while simultaneously wiping any debuffs off the hero. This time he showed up during the day, and found that the hunters had left the village, leaving only the weaklings behind. Kang Hyun reached the chief's wigwam with zero trouble and was ready to pounce, but then he spotted some powerful shamans flanking the boss. The next second a magic seal paralyzed him and his body stopped listening to his brain. Luckily he remembered his new skill just in time, and shattered the spell with a lion's roar. In 2 quick leaps he reached the chief and swung his sword, ending stage 3. Winning after only 2 days of tries gave Kang Hyun a massive ego boost. Back then he was sure he was a total genius, but a whole month had passed since that moment. On another random morning, Kang Hyun jumped at the sound of a gut-wrenching scream coming from her brother's room. After dozens of attempts, the hero finally announced that he had wiped everyone on the stage. But what shocked the girl the most was how pissed he looked right now. Over breakfast, Kang Hyun filled his sister in on how he finally crushed stage 4. The main mission was to lead a bunch of NPCs into battle and smash a dungeon core. At first things were looking up and he even got the team working like a well-oiled machine. It seemed like smooth sailing, but of course that was too good to be true. One night a couple tried to ditch the group while everyone was sleeping. When Kang Hyun caught them red-handed, they just teamed up and shanked him on the spot. Crap like that kept happening day after day, which is why it took a whole month. But then the hero hit on a genius plan. Armed with nothing but pure dictatorship and total annoyance at losing, he decided to force them to listen the next time they started bickering. He ordered everyone to follow his lead or die, making a very messy example out of the first guy who talked back. Seeing a total psycho in charge, and having 0 escape routes, the rest of them were too terrified to even squeak. He took a weird approach to the monsters too. He soloed the undead himself while the other characters just stood there with their jaws on the floor watching the show. This time the trip was way shorter. They reached the dungeon core in a matter of hours. With one swing, Kang Hyun sliced through the pedestal, holding the core, successfully clearing the stage. He scored a lot of loot in that dungeon, but nothing topped his main achievement. His real-world body now matched his shredded physique from the tutorial. He was just finishing a workout when his phone buzzed with an alert about a gate opening right near his house. The streets were a total disaster zone with monsters pouring out. It was all because of the dungeon mechanics. If you don't clear them in time, the gate breaks and lets the monsters into the real world. Kang Hyun watched the chaos from his balcony until he suddenly remembered his sister was at work. She was in serious danger. Without a second thought, the hero bolted for the door. Obviously he needed a weapon, but since he didn't have a sword, a knife would have to do. He still couldn't use his tutorial skills until he officially finished the program, but the raw power in his hands was very real now. With practice strikes, he tore through every goblin he met. Meanwhile, at the office, the workers were barely holding back the monster horde, having barricaded the door with every piece of furniture they could grab. Kang Hyun was there too. She was frantically reading a text from her brother when horrific screams and the sound of a slaughter echoed from behind the door. The barricade gave way, but it wasn't a monster that stepped through to face the office staff. It was Kang Hyun. At least physically, the hero didn't look like a monster, but his expression told a different story. Plus, not everyone was thrilled that he'd just smashed their barricade to pieces. But he promised them there was nothing left to fear since he'd already slaughtered every monster outside the door. Still, there were probably more of them on the upper floors, so he told the office workers to grab the goblins' gear while he cleared the rest of the building. Once the coast was clear, they decided to barricade themselves inside and wait for backup. Despite his raw strength and weapon skills, Kang Hyun still couldn't use his tutorial powers like regeneration or resurrection. While his sister patched up his cuts, he admitted he'd taken so many hits because he'd gotten lazy about dodging, since he usually just relied on coming back to life. Because of all the daytime chaos, he totally forgot that Stage 5 was waiting for him that night. This time he had to weed out a succubus hiding among a group of adventurers. These monsters were famous for being gorgeous and draining men's energy while they slept. The problem was all 3 girls in the group were total knockouts, but he pinpointed a prime suspect pretty fast. His ring, which blocked charm magic, kept vibrating whenever he talked to one of them. Sitting by the campfire that night, the hero was low-key celebrating how easy this stage seemed. The main thing was not to act sus, because if she figured out, he knew she'd just kill him in his sleep. With the plan to act invisible, he drifted off. But to his shock, he woke up back in the office. Apparently his body language gave him away, and the succubus had ended him in his sleep. However, bigger news was popping off right now. The army had arrived to help, and the soldiers were currently clearing the block. Everyone rushed to the window to watch the monsters eat lead. But then a chill ran down Kang Hyun's spine. He felt a massive threat way scarier than any normal goblin. He frantically scanned the street where the cleanup was happening to find the source of his gut feeling. Among the regular green goblins he spotted a red one. This guy looked way more jacked than the others, and the soldiers' bullets were just bouncing off his tough skin. The military didn't stand a snowball's chance in hell against a freak like that. While the office workers were panicking and trying to figure out their next move, the red goblin sensed someone watching. He looked up and locked eyes right with our hero. Their office was his next destination. Meanwhile, the soldiers decided to call for backup because it was dead obvious their gear wasn't doing squat. HQ promised to send over one capable person to help out a civilian. Too bad the red goblin had already picked its prey and launched an attack, leaving the terrified soldiers just waiting to meet their maker. But out of nowhere, a chunk of concrete slammed into the monster's face, killing its momentum and tossing it back. The guy who threw that slab was already hopping into a military truck while the soldiers just stood there in shock. Between the carnage and Kang Hyun's insane expression, they actually thought he was another monster at first, and leveled their guns at him. Then it clicked. Was this the guy sent by HQ? The officer started apologizing, not knowing the hero wasn't actually there to do them a favor. He just knew that after finishing the soldiers, the goblin would head for the office, which meant a massive body count. Still, he decided to play along with their mistake and told the military to hold their fire before stepping forward. As a final request, he told them to toss some tear gas at the monster. Just as the beast was about to lung, a canister flew in, wrapping the middle of the street in a thick cloud of gas. Our guy had learned the hard way that goblins can't fight back worth a damn when their senses are messed up. Sure, he was suffering from the gas too, but he had enough pure rage left to keep swinging. First, he disarmed the goblin and then started raining down a series of blows. But pretty soon exhaustion started creeping in because the monster's hide was way tougher than he expected. It was so thick his strikes weren't even leaving a scratch. Meanwhile, the soldiers were still watching from the sidelines until a newcomer caught their eye. This was the guy HQ actually sent. Kang Hyun backed off for a second to figure out how to crack this tank of an opponent. Suddenly, someone blurred past him like the wind and started landing lightning-fast hits on the goblin. The newcomer realized instantly that slashing was useless and told our hero they needed to team up. While he distracted the monster, Kang Hyun had to find a weak spot and land the finishing blow. After all, this was just the boss of the easiest dungeon type. Kang Hyun agreed and they double-teamed the freak. But the hero was running on fumes and damn it, his sword snapped on the next hit. That's when he remembered the orc weapon and scrambled for it. Now he just had to pick a spot. Usually weak points are where the skin is thin, like behind the knees or the neck, but our hero decided to be totally unpredictable and jabbed the goblin right in the ass. The logic was simple: if the armor is too tough, you gotta aim for the cracks in the shell. The moment he landed the hit, the hero realized that trying to kill it from that angle was a lost cause, 0 vital organs in range. That's when he decided to switch things up and get creative. He flipped the monster onto its back and jammed his blade straight through its open maw. Finally, the seemingly endless brawl was over. But then he spotted some weird item that dropped from the goblin's corpse. The system was being a total jerk though, refusing to show the description to anyone who hadn't finished the tutorial. He didn't care, he swiped the loot anyway. Suddenly some newcomer started shouting at him. Assuming the guy just wanted a cut of the spoils, Kang Hyun ignored his attempts to talk and bolted from the scene. With the red freak dead, the military managed to sweep the rest of the block, and the office staff finally got the green light to head home. Naturally, in his rush to be a hero genius, Kang Hyun had forgotten to lock his apartment, so the monsters had turned the place into a total dumpster fire. By evening, social media was exploding with talk about the incident. Everyone was roasting the hero's terrifying facial expression, which pissed him off to no end. At least now he could finally get back to the tutorial in peace. He figured it'd be a walk in the park since he already knew who the succubus was. But to his total disappointment, instead of a pretty face, he was greeted by a goblin's ugly mug. His reflexes kicked in instantly, and the system window cleared up his confusion right away. For some reason, the mission had shifted now. He had to clear out a whole monster den. Needless to say, that attempt was a total fail. The next day, the mission flipped again. Now he had to sniff out a doppelganger in the adventurer squad. The hero couldn't shake the feeling that he was being dragged into mafia game. But this time he decided not to waste any more time. He ordered everyone to gather round and declared that the first person to move was the doppelganger. In that moment, he somehow forgot that the loudmouth is always the first to get iced, and that he'd been a total loser at mafia his whole life. It ended up taking him a month and a half to clear this stage. He even tried dressing up like a smart guy, as if a new outfit would magically grant him the wisdom to pass. By his 45th attempt, he found himself in some underground tunnel. This time the goal was to kill a tarantula after finding its weakness in the spider nest. The big boss crawled out a minute later and went straight for the jugular, splashing the hero with venom. He managed to dodge just in time, but his arm still got hit. Kang Hyun went full hardcore to fix it. He hacked off the poisoned limb before the venom could spread through his system, and then slid right under the belly of the stunned monster. He decided to ditch the search for clues or weak spots and just leaned into his true strength brute force. Since he didn't have to use his brain this time, he actually made it through without getting stuck in a loop. In the end, he walked away with one big lesson: brains are only for people who don't have enough power in their fists. The 6th and 7th stages went by way easier after that, and he rushed to drop his expert tips for other people still stuck in training. To his annoyance, not everyone was a fan of his cut it off and smash it tactics. But whatever. The final stage was right ahead, the one that would put him on the same level as the world-famous guild leaders. It was time for stage 8, and Kang Hyun just hoped he wouldn't blow more than a week here. Suddenly the task window asked him about his beliefs. Before he could even process the question, the snow-white space started crumbling, and he plummeted down. The fall didn't end with a crash, though. The hero cautiously opened his eyes and found himself on a regular street. The first shocker was that the citizens just walked right through him. The second was the realization that he wasn't surrounded by humans but some kind of aliens. Suddenly one of them stopped and stared straight at Kang Hyun. But it turned out the reason for that intense look wasn't the hero, but the monsters behind him. A horde of beasts flooded the streets of the civilized city, and the locals bolted. Kang Hyun had met some of these monsters before, but many were totally new to him. He was floored by how dangerous and jacked these freaks were. The situation quickly turned into a living nightmare. Kang Hyun realized this same fate might be waiting for Earth in 5 years. Suddenly a massive creature loomed over the city. It started pushing forward, and the hero didn't have time to run. Luckily, he was still transparent to everything happening, so he didn't get hurt. Opening his eyes, he found himself back in the white void. A melodic but ice-cold voice suddenly welcomed him. Kang Hyun saw a glowing figure that looked like a god, but the being told him to just think of it as the space administrator. Now the hero had a chance to ask anything, and he went straight for the big one about Earth's future. The administrator didn't give a straight answer but warned that everything depended on how humanity behaved. It turned out the being didn't have the power to stop the invasion, but it was the one who built the training and the system to help. In return, it asked what Kang Hyun lived for. He just said he lived for his little sister and his parents. But when the topic of being a hero came up, he admitted he wasn't interested. The administrator said it was fun watching the hero during training, even though it thought he had zero talent. The talk reminded Kang Hyun of stage 5, and he decided to ask why the missions kept changing. Suddenly, the administrator refused to answer. A window popped up congratulating the hero on finishing his training. He started getting pulled away no matter how much he fought it. That reaction made it crystal clear that the being was behind all his suffering in stage 5. In the next second, Kang Hyun woke up in his bed. This time his scream got cut short because his mouth was stuffed. His sister had shoved a sock in there since she knew he'd scream and wake the neighbors again. With a smug grin, Kang Hyun guessed that he'd failed the mission again, but the hero just smirked back and summoned his status window. After breakfast, the girl headed to work, and the hero had to figure out his next move. First thing he did was check the loot from that red goblin. It turned out to be a skill book for Magic Blast. Finally, he could start learning magic and using his hidden stats. Now it was time to sign up for the Awakened Training Corps. The recruitment center was way more crowded than he expected, but the real headache was the mismatch between his ID photo and his current face. His look had become so terrifying that he actually made the girl at the desk cry. A specialist noticed the commotion and rushed over to help. Kang Hyun recognized the voice, and the blonde guy in glasses recognized the hero's face. Neither of them made a scene about it yet, and they just focused on fixing the situation. The hero swore his skills had warped his looks, and even offered to do a fingerprint check. To avoid unwanted attention, he wrote down that he'd only cleared 5 stages. But even with those fake low numbers, the specialist realized he was looking at a powerhouse candidate. Kang Hyun also had to show off a couple of his skills like regeneration and lion's roar. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with his little demonstration, but the specialist was satisfied and invited the hero to join the training program. After that, Kang Hyun found himself in a regular classroom. Everyone was still buzzing about his flashy entrance. One of the awakened guys couldn't take his eyes off him, but soon enough that same specialist showed up. His name was Kim Ehan, and he was the one in charge of training this group. Next came the intro part where they explained the training structure and what to expect at the finish line. Then the theory lesson started. It was going to be the start of every single day, and our hero was already losing his mind from how boring it was. But suddenly another student joined him. It was weird for Kang Hyun. Guaxul, a guy with massive muscles, decided to come over and introduce himself, which caught the hero off guard. But his real motives became clear a second later. He wanted to flex his strength and put Kang Hyun in his place. Apparently that scene at the reception desk had bruised his ego. But he made a massive mistake trying to punish our guy. Kang Hyun triggered his giant strength, a skill that boosted his power by 12 points using magic. Needless to say, Guaxul regretted his life choices immediately, but he couldn't just back down. Everyone would think he was a wimp. That was his second mistake, not quitting while he had the chance. The next moment the guy's arm just exploded from the sheer pressure. Of course Kang Hyun was dragged straight to the teacher's office to explain himself. The story about Guoksul's arm just blowing up on its own didn't fly with anyone. Plus the hero was so stressed he started tripping over his own lies about his true power. The teacher caught those slips right away but didn't push for more details. He sent the hero back to class, but before he could even catch his breath, someone else sat down next to him. An Yusung didn't seem scared to be near the hero at all. In fact, he was actually pretty friendly. But it soon became obvious the kid was way too interested in the incident with the meathead. Their talk got cut short by the teacher. It was time for a lecture on dungeons and the cores that kept them running. But then another muscle brain started making a scene about why they even needed theory lessons. The teacher offered him a sparring match to show him how things really worked. Kang Hyun and An Yusung couldn't wait to see how this drama would end. Kim Hyun took this student's education very seriously because the only thing worse than laziness was disrespect. He showed the meathead exactly why muscles without a brain meant nothing on the battlefield. He did the whole thing in just 90 seconds without even landing a single counterpunch. Kang Hyun had seen a pro mock fight with a rookie before just by dodging, but now he saw for himself that the same massive power gap existed among the awakened too. Even our hero would have a hard time if an opponent had that kind of speed. It made him even more curious about who would win if he went up against the teacher himself. To his surprise, he wasn't the only one thinking that. An Yusung had a totally insane look on his face. The hero decided right then that he didn't want to be associated with a guy like that. After the theory part, it was time for practice. Since there weren't enough trainers, the students picked their favorite weapons and had to swing at thin air. Plus, sparring between students was strictly banned. While everyone else followed orders, the hero just wandered around the training field. The average level here was lower than he expected. He had nothing to do but practice some combat choreography. Of course, his flashy moves caught a trainer's eye pretty fast, and the guy decided to give our rookie some advice. His arrogant tone really pissed the hero off, and he almost challenged the trainer to a fight. Well, he really wanted to, but he held back at the last second. But then out of nowhere, Kim Hyun himself suggested they duel. The trainer wouldn't have to hold back, but they could only exchange 2 hits. The man was shocked by this turn of events, but our hero was loving it. A minute later, they lunged at each other. The trainer barely managed to block the kid's massive strike, but the raw power and pressure were just too much. A second later, the trainer was disarmed. In the end, Kim Hyun turned it into a lesson about staying on your toes and being able to adapt. But he had his own agenda too. He wanted to test a theory, and he finally found the proof he was looking for. The next few days followed the exact same script. Lectures in the morning and training after. Every day Kang Hyun got more and more bored. On day 6 he was complaining to his new friend again, but the guy promised today's practice would actually be fun. They were finally allowed to spar, but the hero still wasn't feeling it. The whole thing felt like a playground scrap. Even though the students were total scrubs at fighting, the teacher still had to step in every now and then. Next up to the stage was An Yusung. Kang Hyun clocked his expression immediately and remembered their talk from before. This kid was definitely up to something. The blonde guy was put up against a girl mage. She blasted him with a spell, but he smashed her shots out of the air with a couple swings of his mace like it was nothing. He basically redirected her next attack and sent it flying right at the instructor. While Kim Hyun was distracted, the kid slipped past him and bolted straight for the girl. Blood started soaking the floor of the stage, and a horrific, insane grin spread across An Yusung's face. He was clearly loving every second of mutilating living beings. Panic broke out instantly. People started calling for an ambulance while they scrambled to keep the girl conscious. The teacher pulled one of his blades to shut An Yusung down, but the kid just acted like he'd made a mistake. It was a total lie, and everyone saw what really happened. Still, the teacher let him off the hook for now and called a break. Kang Hyun couldn't help but notice he'd seen a blade like that before. Despite the mess, the sparring matches kept going. But now trainers were hovering over every student to stop any more accidents before they started. They even brought in an awakened healer despite how much those guys charged. Kang Hyun seemed totally unfazed by the vibe and marched into the teacher's office after class to demand a spar. The guy didn't seem interested until the hero mentioned they'd met before. Finally, they both admitted they'd crossed paths during the gate breakout. But in his rush to fight, Kang Hyun got sloppy with his cover story. In the training hall, Kim Hyun's sharp eyes caught right away that the hero's gear didn't match someone who'd only cleared 5 stages. Our guy refused to come clean, so the teacher decided to play along with the lie. The next second, he blurred behind the hero with lightning speed. Kang Hyun barely managed to parry, but then the teacher vanished again. The man started circling the hero, landing a barrage of hits from every angle. But Kang Hyun finally felt that combat spark he'd been missing all these days. Kim Hyun decided to stop holding back to chill the student out, but he didn't expect the kid to intentionally take a hit to the arm. Not only that, but he jammed the blade between his radius and ulna bones to trap it, and then headbutted the teacher square in the forehead. The spar ended right there, and Kim Hyun was left stunned that he'd actually lost. The next morning the students were hauled over to a gate to clear a low-level dungeon called the Geika Forest. The place was packed with monsters that were supposed to be easy pickings for the rookies. After the briefing everyone stepped inside, and a second later they were standing in a tropical palm forest. A few assistants headed out to bait some geikas to make the fight easier. These freaks were taller than a grown man with jacked legs and beaks and claws sharp enough to shred armor. The teacher was busy explaining the theory when a system message suddenly flashed for everyone. The dungeon core had been snatched and the whole dimension was about to collapse. Everyone bolted for the exit portal before the place crushed them. The situation was a total shocker, but everyone managed to scramble out. But the trouble didn't stop there. A gate break started and Kim Hyun ordered everyone to get the hell out of there immediately. But he asked Kang Hyun specifically to stay and back him up. The moment the breach occurred, the monsters within would begin pouring into the real world. The first wave of beasts began popping out of the gate, and the teacher ran to help the other students, leaving the hero alone to hold back the entire Geika horde. But out of nowhere, another student sprinted over to join Kang Hyun. Of course it was An Yu-sung. The guy didn't come to play hero though, he just wanted to satisfy his thirst for blood and killing. The hero felt totally disgusted by him, but he definitely needed the extra hands. Drawing his sword he charged in and started landing lightning-fast strikes. He also ripped a lion's roar to nerf the monsters. Instantly, every beast on the battlefield got weaker, and all the specialists noticed it. Backup was supposed to arrive soon to clean up the mess. Kang Hyun decided to test out his new magic blast skill. He didn't expect the blast to hurt the caster just as much as the enemy. Suddenly something else caught his eye. A massive Geika stepped out of the gate, the dungeon boss. The teacher was freaking out for real. Despite the strength of the two students on the front line, this was their first time facing such a powerhouse. But he couldn't see the insane grins on those two, or the pure bloodlust in their eyes. That evening Kim Hyun got called in to report the whole mess to the guild leader. He couldn't leave out the two students who stole the show. One had insane strength and regeneration, plus this unpredictable style that left the enemy zero breathing room. The second guy was craftier with killer combat instincts, but his bloodlust sometimes messed with his flow. Kim Hyun hadn't had a chance to recruit them yet, but it was clear the guild leader was already eyeing these new awakened. A few days later the graduation ceremony went down, and everyone got their dungeon clearing licenses. Kang Hyun was shocked to find out his new buddy was actually loaded when the guy offered him a ride home in a luxury Bentley. Before they took off, Kim Hyun himself walked up to talk about the rewards for the Geika Forest raid. He gave the hero a final pat on the back for his progress, but warned him about the weight of having that much power. Once he got home, Kang Hyun couldn't stop flexing his license in front of his sister. He was itching to start clearing dungeons, but he didn't know where to find the right level ones yet. It turned out the Awakened had already built a special app for that. Considering the difficulty of the dungeon he'd just survived, the hero was sure he didn't even need a team. A month passed after that. His parents started getting surprised by the fat stacks of cash hitting their bank account regularly, but they were just happy their son finally found a job. Of course they had no clue what he was actually doing, or they would have died of worry. Back then they didn't realize an unstable gate had popped up right outside their window and broken open, letting orc monsters loose. That morning the hero was leaving a dungeon he'd cleared overnight like it was no big deal when he saw a ton of missed calls from his sister. She quickly told him what happened to their mom and dad, and Kang Hyun realized sleep could wait. The news was screaming about the gate break and how the army had locked down the district to contain the monsters. The hero headed home to gear up. Kim Hyun was a wreck, worrying about him and their parents, so she begged him to be careful. But the hero knew the drill and promised to bring their parents back safe and sound. All the roads to the danger zone were blocked, and civilian cars were being turned away. Only the Awakened were allowed through to help with the cleanup. It turned out there weren't just 1 but 5 dungeons open in the area. The hero just floored the gas to get there faster. Suddenly a massive boar leaped onto the road and smashed his car aside. He was ready to scrap with the beast, but then he heard the war cries of a goblin army. Kang Hyun couldn't waste time here, so he decided to just bolt while the monsters tore each other apart. Now he was out of wheels and slowed down big time, but his grit didn't fade. Using the map on his phone, he kept pushing forward even as exhaustion started catching up. Suddenly he heard a rustle in the bushes. His combat instincts flared, and he swung his sword just in time to kill the creature. It was a wolf that had turned invisible before the pounce. A second later he saw he was surrounded by the whole pack. It took a few minutes to butcher them all, but new ones were already closing in. It wasn't until the middle of the night that Kang Hyun finally got a chance to crash until dawn. A tree branch wasn't exactly a 5-star bed, but it beat sleeping on the ground. It was time to move out. Meanwhile, the hero's parents were sitting in their apartment, quiet as mice, rereading the text from their son promising to save them. Orcs were prowling the streets, making them lock every bolt in the house. What terrified them most was a different monster that showed up a couple hours ago. That thing had slaughtered every other monster around and gave off an even scarier vibe. Kang Hyun proved that handling a whole horde of regular orcs was actually pretty easy. But then 3 more stepped out. These weren't scrubs, they were elite warriors. Backing up, he shouted to his parents that he came to save them and told them to keep dead quiet. Only the sound of his voice let them realize the monster on the street was actually their son. The hero lunged into the attack. These monsters were way tougher than the others, but the guy used his skills to KO the first one in a flash. Right after that, the second one charged, but Kang Hyun parried the strike and buried his sword in its chest. Flipping the beast over his shoulder, he slammed 2 orcs to the ground. The third was still kicking, but the hero triggered a magic blast and turned its head into red mist. That one fight alone wiped him out, but a crowd of other orcs was already closing in. The scariest part wasn't the warriors. He could take them. It was the massive dungeon boss, an orc general. Kang Hyun struggled to his feet and decided to dump all his energy into giant strength instead of regen. He also ripped a lion's roar, but his effort was for nothing. One hit from the general sent him flying. He didn't even have time to block. The other orcs just stood in a circle watching the fight, or more like watching a cat play with a mouse. After a few more hits, it was obvious the hero's body had stopped regenerating, but he still refused to quit when his family's lives were on the line. The huge orc was surprised when the little brat charged again, but then the hero noticed some orcs creeping toward his parents' window. He tried to break out of the circle, but they wouldn't let him. Finally, the massive orc grabbed him by the head and slammed him into the pavement. Everything started to fade. This was it. He didn't even know if he could resurrect this time. Suddenly, the huge orc was sliced to ribbons. The guild had finally arrived for the cleanup. In a matter of seconds, it was all over, and every monster was slaughtered. Kang Hyun had bunched all the orcs in one spot, which made the guild's job easy, but he died fighting. When the guild leader looked back at the corpse, it vanished in a totally mysterious way. The hero woke up on the exact same tree branch where he had last fallen asleep. Resurrection takes 24 hours after death, which meant something terrible could have happened to his parents in the meantime. He took off immediately, forcing himself to ignore the strange heaviness in his body. After running for 5 hours, he reached his parents' apartment, but found only a trashed room and deathly silence. Heading back home, he got lucky enough to find a military checkpoint to borrow a phone. It turned out his father had lost an arm and his mother was in a coma. It was 2 months ago. To drown out the memories and the crushing guilt, Kang Hyun stopped coming home, often spending all his time in dungeons instead. For the last 2 months, he had been hitting dungeons that other teams were already clearing. But this time the group was floored that a guy showed up solo. Ignoring their warnings, the hero charged ahead. Seeing an army of monstrous insects waiting for him, Kang Hyun triggered his new skill, Secret of Wayne. It boosted his power by sacrificing his own health. Clearly, in his current mental state, he preferred to exhaust himself to the limit, punishing himself through battle. Only thanks to sheer luck did his regeneration barely manage to offset the cost of his new skill. In the dungeon, the hero only cared about killing monsters and grabbing the core. He left all the other loot behind, which the other adventurers were happy to scoop up. His only focus now was getting stronger. He pushed ahead toward the main core while the rest of the party stood there wondering if they had just run into that legendary lone wolf everyone talked about. Soon the system announced that all cores were collected, and the portal out opened. As a reward for taking down the boss, Kang Hyun got a new skill book called Antria Shell, which hardened his skin and bumped up his defense. Everything just fueled his regret over what happened during the orc fight, but nothing could be fixed now. He could only keep getting stronger. Reporters swarmed the dungeon exit the second the team stepped out. They were all hunting for the lone wolf hero. Flashes blinded Kang Hyun as cameras clicked and endless questions rained down on him. Everyone shoved guild business cards into his face, but he turned them all down. He didn't just ignore the pests who got too close. He made it clear they should back off, or suffer the consequences. Shaking off the annoyance, he made it to the parking lot. A man named Sun Young-ho caught up to him. He was polite and invited Kang Hyun to join the Awakened Association. He walked away without waiting for an answer. Unlike the greedy guilds, this group focused on protecting the rights of the Awakened. After the raid, the hero hit up a 24-hour convenience store to grab a snack and plot his stat build. He needed to bump up his magic stat to unlock a new skill, but that required a specific artifact. The store was a bust, but he found a lead on a forum. A mana-boosting ring was waiting for him. The next day, he headed to a dungeon guarded by a shaman known to drop the loot. The forum said a shady group was illegally squatting there. This was becoming a trend in several dungeons lately. He found the gate deep in the woods. It was quiet outside. Keeping his guard up, he stepped through the portal. A group of thugs was waiting right there. Their eyes lit up like predators when they saw his gear. It was obvious. They weren't fighting monsters. They were hunting adventurers. They had basically claimed this dungeon for their own guild. In a split second, their cocky grins turned into pure shock. Kang Hyun sent one guy flying back several meters with a single punch. The rest of them started making noise, but they had no clue who they were messing with. The hero grabbed an attacker's sword with his bare hand and crushed the steel before kicking the guy aside. He blasted the girl's arm to pieces with a magic blast. Within a minute, the rest of the guild swarmed in. They all drew their weapons. They had no idea they had just walked into their own graveyard. 10 minutes of pure chaos later, and Kang Hyun was the only one left standing. He didn't kill the thugs, just crippled them because he needed a guide. Kim Sun-woo, the weakest link of the guild, won the role. The rest of them were left in no shape to keep up their dirty business. Kang Hyun beat the living hell out of them, leaving them half dead before moving deeper with his guide. The day flew by because the kid kept trying to skirt around monsters, having no clue about Kang Hyun's real power. Nightfall brought a camp break. During dinner, the guide spilled his guts about his dad's debts and being broke. Kang Hyun shut him down mid-sob story. He could not care less about the sob story of a guy in a bottom-tier scumbag guild. In the middle of the night, Kim Sun-woo woke up ready to end the hero, but remembered that insane strength and chickened out. Suddenly, Kang Hyun growled at him to get back to sleep. The next morning, they hit the goblin village where the core was chilling. The energy around the place was thick. The guide couldn't wait to see the end because he was certain he'd led Kang Hyun into a death trap. Every single goblin in the dungeon was gathered there. The kid expected a massacre, but the hero just met the army with a crazy grin. He knew he was gonna win. Suddenly, a backpack slammed into the back of his head. The guide had made a break for it, leaving him to get torn to shreds. An hour later, Kim Sun-woo finally stopped to catch his breath. That was the exact moment the system pinged him that the core was gone, and the exit portal was wide open. The guy couldn't believe the hero had single-handedly crushed such a massive threat. He could have blamed Kang Hyun's insane physical strength, or his endurance, or his crazy high defense. Taking the shortest path to the boss like that was a strategy only a complete lunatic would attempt. Unfortunately for the kid, our hero was exactly that kind of madman. The loot drop was legit. He got the mana increase ring, and Kang Hyun decided to dip. But waiting at the exit was the entire rest of the guild, at least 100 of them. He even spotted Kim Sun-woo in the crowd, who had clearly ratted him out. The hero started cracking his shoulders, ready to throw down, but to his surprise, the guild leader stepped forward and asked for a word. Jian Ayan, the guild boss, apologized for his men's actions and started trying to recruit Kang Hyun on the spot. Snagging a fighter that strong would be like hitting the jackpot, and the guy saw it as the perfect move for his guild. He didn't demand an answer right away, and just offered a business card. But the hero tore the card to pieces right in front of him. He made his stance on their trashy guild crystal clear. He might not be a saint himself, but he refused to be associated with bottom feeders like them. He walked away, calling them pests who were just ruining everyone's day. Once he finally made it to the parking lot, he dropped the confident mask for the first time. The truth was, he had been scared out of his mind when he saw how many of them there were. The next day, he took his sister out for Korean BBQ. He only cared about leveling up his stats and his parents' well-being, so he figured he might as well dump his spare cash into some decent food. The only time he cracked a real smile was when they talked about their parents getting better. Walking back from the restroom, he was shocked to see his sister chatting with some random guy. He figured someone was trying to recruit her, but it turned out he was the one getting the mystery note. Inside wasn't a job offer, but a straight-up threat with the Bait Guild leader's contact info. Later that night, Kang Hyun headed to the store after making his sister lock herself in the house. On the way back, his dad called to say mom had woken up, but he also mentioned that Jun Yun had stopped by the hospital, pretending to be the hero's friend. That was the last straw. They'd already tracked down his entire family. The next day, he marched straight to the training center. Just like on his first day, he ran into the girl from the admissions desk. She recognized that insane look in his eyes instantly and started screaming. But once she actually listened, she realized he was just asking for Kim In-yeon so he could protect his family. She told him exactly where to find him. Half an hour later, the instructor's lecture got cut short because some kind of monster was causing chaos in the lobby and demanding to see him. Finally, face to face with Kim Il-fun, the hero got straight to the point. He needed help protecting his family. Of course, many already knew about Bait Guild's reputation, but right now no one could do anything about them. The man did not quite understand why he was asking for help from him specifically. Kang Hyun honestly admitted that he was the strongest of those he knew, and An Yu-sung was hard to trust because of his insane behavior. All he asked for was to protect his family for 1 week, and even offered to pay Kim Il-fun. The instructor replied that he earned much more than one could imagine, and considering his position as vice leader of the guild, he needed to be offered something more substantial than money. For example, meeting with his guild leader after everything was over. The next day, bodyguards were stationed at the hospital near his apartment, and at his sister's work. Kang Hyun himself arrived at the Bait Guild building to meet them. Kim Il-fun warned him that they had most likely gathered all their forces there and had likely set up an ambush as soon as the hero called them to arrange the meeting. But for the guy, the main thing was the safety of his family. He said goodbye to the instructor and, getting out of the car, asked him to park the car at his house. The man was wary, but Kang Hyun reassured him that he was not going to die and would return alive tomorrow. Inside the building, the hero was met by the guild leader behind whom stood an entire army of fighters with weapons at the ready. Obviously, it was not a very warm welcome, no matter how much Jun Ifan tried to pass it off as a friendly meeting. His clumsy acting only made Kang Hyun laugh. He activated a magic blast and aimed it at the floor. Pieces of tile and concrete flew around the guy, clearly wanting to bring down the whole building. The only reinforcement left was the steel bars in the foundation, but Kang Hyun grabbed his sword and activated all his buffs, all for the sake of one strike. A moment later, the guild members flew down along with the remains of the floor. The hero himself, unscathed thanks to skin reinforcement, jumped out from under the rubble. The guild leader appeared right after jumping down from above, and still continued his tirade about how Kang Hyun could still join them. He apologized for involving the hero's family in their affairs, and offered to unite to become the strongest guild. They had enough people, but they needed a representative, a strong awakened. In response to this, Kang Hyun spat in his face. Obviously, he was not interested in uniting with them. That was exactly when Jun Ifan's friendly face crumbled. Barely containing his fury, the guild leader snarled that the hero was a worthless plebeian who would never grasp his grand ambitions. Kang Hyun just laughed in his face because in his eyes every one of these lackeys was a plebeian by definition. But when Jun Ifan gave the command, the entire horde surged forward at once. The mages struck first, but Lion's Roar thundered out, reflecting their spells while draining the strength from every attacker in range. The guild leader was livid, noticing the stark terror in his men's eyes, yet they pushed through their dread and rushed the guy again. Kang Hyun triggered defensive reinforcement just in time, turning his body into an impenetrable fortress, and as the enemies closed in for melee, he began butchering them like livestock. The bloody slaughter dragged on until sunset. After hours of grueling combat and a mountain of corpses, the hero still stood surrounded. 200 men was no joke, and Jun Ifan was genuinely stunned by the boy's relentless stamina. But the limit was finally reached when magical ropes shackled his limbs, and there was no strength left to resist. A mercenary lunged from behind and plunged a sword straight into his chest. Then the guild leader himself stepped up, because to him an unruly beast was nothing more than a pest to be purged, so he slammed his hand onto the boy's head and unleashed a torrent of hellfire. The flames greedily consumed Kang Hyun, while the man walked away calmly, calculating the losses because that insane madman had caused a mountain of trouble and offered nothing of value. The job seemed finished and it was time to scavenge the loot, but everyone froze in shock when the corpse, along with every piece of armor, vanished into thin air, as if it had never existed. The next morning, the hero emerged from his room as if nothing had happened, looking for a snack. 2 days passed, and Bait Guild was back to its old tricks, brazenly squatting in dungeons. They even had the audacity to gripe about why no one was walking into their traps anymore. But then a lone silhouette in a balaclava appeared on the horizon, walking toward the gate with cold, absolute confidence. After Kang Hyun recklessly stormed the nest of vipers, he realized it was more effective to dismantle the guild bit by bit with calculation. Every occupied dungeon housed a specific faction of the guild. Finding the first base was not difficult, but it became even easier when the last survivor spilled everything he knew about the other locations under the threat of death. Naturally, Kang Hyun did not let him live. It was crucial to leave no witnesses, and these people were completely oblivious to the monstrosity of their actions. Within a few days, such incidents became frequent, and even drew the attention of reporters. The guild leader was furious. Just as he had gotten rid of one problem, a second one appeared. An uninvited assistant reported yet another attack on one of their dungeons. The more men they sent, the more bodies piled up. The madman left no one behind. The man had only one answer. Excluding the useless family of Kang Hyun, it was likely one of his acquaintances, seeking revenge. It could not go on like this, so Jun Ifan decided to call the only person crazy enough to get involved, just for the fun of the game, An Yu-sung. By evening, the guy was standing near one of the guild's dungeons, guarding the entrance alongside another man. He had already started to get bored, but still hoped to find a fight with someone strong. As if on cue, a mysterious masked avenger stepped out of the shadows. An Yu-sung immediately sensed an incredible power radiating from the stranger, and pulled out his mace. But suddenly the stranger addressed him by name, surprised to see him there. The voice instantly gave Kang Hyun away. Everything fell into place. Who else could have haunted the Bait Guild so successfully, if not the hero himself? But the guy remembered Kim Ifan's warning about An Yu-sung's connections. This sparked the suspicion that the blonde was part of the guild. The guy wasn't even offended, but smiled that he had been lumped in with such scum. He gladly spoke about his deal with Jun Ifan and how much fun it was when the guild leader came to him for help. Kang Hyun had already thought everything was settled, but his friend was so consumed by the promise of battle that he attacked the guy the moment he turned away. Fortunately, the hero blocked the blow in time, but decided not to let it slide, and charged into the attack himself. It was obvious that he wouldn't pull his punches just because of their friendship, but that was exactly what An Yu-sung wanted. The two began trading attacks. While the blonde enjoyed what was happening, the hero only thought about how to end this fight as quickly as possible. But his face showed that he too had missed fighting someone of equal strength. Suddenly a guild member wanted to intervene in their battle, but An Yu-sung himself blew his head off with a mace. It was clear they were never on the same side. Now the mood for a friendly spar was ruined. Kang Hyun could finally return to his plan, but unexpectedly the blonde proposed to help him. Over the next few days, the guild's affairs went from bad to worse. Dungeons were still being attacked, and members began to desert their ranks. Jun Ifan had only one solution: to threaten their relatives so they would return to the guild. Unlike him, Kang Hyun and An Yu-sung were just having fun because everything was going according to plan. But now the time had come for the final chord. Even the blonde thought the hero's idea was pure madness. The guy sent the guild leader a note with the spot for their final showdown. Obviously the leader was just looking for an excuse to crush the annoying bastard, so he brought a whole mob to finish him off. Hardly anyone was there by choice, they were all being blackmailed one way or another. 3 minutes passed and the leader was looking pissed that he was being kept waiting. Suddenly they saw a cloud of dust and heard thundering footsteps. Something was moving toward them and moving fast. As it got closer, they spotted Kang Hyun's face. He was laughing hysterically while leading a massive pack of wolves. He pulled a wolf pup out of his bag and tossed it right at the guild members. They dropped their weapons to catch the cute cub. The leader finally clocked the kid's plan. He'd swiped the pups to trigger the adult wolves' rage and led the beasts straight into their ranks. In the next second, he hurled the bag of pups at them and launched his first strike, which Jun Ifan barely dodged. But then they had to deal with the wolves. Meanwhile, the hero dived deep into enemy lines to tear the guild apart alongside the monsters. The leader realized the only chance to survive was to bail. Everyone scrambled toward the portal, but out of nowhere, In Yu-sung popped out, blocking their path and landing the first blow. That left the bait guild caught in a deadly crossfire. Jun Ifan definitely didn't see In Yu-sung's betrayal coming at a time like this. He kept looking around like a cornered rat, watching his subordinates get butchered while he scrambled for an exit. It was crystal clear that the end was coming fast, but Jun Ifan decided to pull one last ace from his sleeve. If he was going down, he was taking Kang Hyun to hell with him. The guild boss used a skill to coat his entire body in flames and lunged at the kid. Their collision set off a massive explosion. A move like that could easily kill Jun Ifan too, but he was willing to take the risk just to put Kang Hyun in a grave. But the plan went sideways. The guild leader totally underestimated how hard his opponent was to kill. The hero grabbed him by the head and kicked him away like trash. Kang Hyun decided to save him for dessert, leaving the man to watch his entire guild get wiped out. Everything crumbled because of one single guy. A few hours later, the edge of the forest was littered with the bodies of men and beasts. It was finally Jun Ifan's turn, but he just started laughing hysterically, which totally confused Kang Hyun and An Yu-sung. Soon the laughter turned into sobbing. He couldn't believe his life was ending just like that. The guild boss started a sob story about his rough childhood as an illegitimate kid, and how he founded the guild, but a sword swing cut him off mid-sentence. The man's head hit the dirt. An Yu-sung admitted he had a blast, and Kang Hyun felt a massive weight lift now that the pests were gone. The blonde kid decided the hero should keep all the loot for himself. The whole mess with the guild made the hero realize that a little cash and raw power weren't enough to protect the people he loved. That's when the idea hit him to start his own guild. The first person he invited was An Yu-sung. The kid was down for anything as long as it stayed fun. A week passed since the dungeon event, and the chairman was losing his mind because nobody could find his son or the bait guild. He summoned the man who helped set up the guild and promised to back Jun Ifan. But Choi Min-jun just smirked and brushed off the chairman's demands. He said he did the job he was paid for and didn't sign up to be a babysitter. In a blind rage, the chairman ordered his goons to take out the cocky punk, and they lunged in. Of course, they had no clue how powerful Choi Min-jun actually was. Without breaking a sweat, he pinned them down with energy tentacles. He calmly walked up to the chairman, forcing him to back away, while he made it clear he'd met the contract terms and definitely wasn't a nanny. The man had zero chance against that kind of threat and apologized immediately. The energy flows vanished in an instant, leaving the guards gasping for air. Choi Min-jun turned around like nothing happened, reminded the guy about the wire transfer, and started wondering who exactly managed to crush his protege. Naturally, the disappearance of the third strongest guild set the internet on fire with rumors and ghost stories. But people forgot pretty fast, and the world kept turning. Meanwhile, Kang Hyun decided to throw a feast for himself and An Yu-sung after selling off all the loot they stripped from the bait guild. Suddenly, he got a call from Kim Ifan. The instructor reminded him of their deal. Kang Hyun had to meet Han Se-hyun, the leader of the Donggen Guild. An Yu-sung begged to come along since he knew her from high society parties. Han Se-hyun turned out to be very friendly and chill. Kang Hyun thanked her for the help and asked how he could pay her back. Naturally, the guild leader was mostly interested in recruiting such a beastly fighter, but the hero shut her down instantly without a second thought. Han Se-yun took his rejection surprisingly well, almost as if she expected it. In return, the hero promised to repay his debt some other way. What really worried the girl was the safety of the country. She feared they had 3 years at most before everything collapsed. When Kang Hyun asked where she got that data, she mentioned an entity that regularly contacted her associate. This set off alarm bells for the hero. She was definitely talking about an administrator. She pointed out that growing stronger requires taking massive risks, something most people try to avoid. Dungeons were getting harder, and fewer people could clear them. In the end, only people like Kang Hyun would be capable of saving the world. The hero reminded her he wasn't exactly a good guy, since he had wiped out an entire guild, but Han Se-yun brushed it off. In her eyes, those insects, regardless of their numbers, were worth far less than an awakened like him. As the meeting wrapped up and Kim E-hyun came to check in, Han Se-yun did not miss how the hero reacted to the mention of the administrator. She realized right then that he had finished all 8 stages of training. Meanwhile, Kang Hyun took the talk about risk to heart. He decided to start clearing rank 4 dungeons instead of his usual rank 5 or 6. Naturally, the monsters here were more numerous and way more vicious. The Diane's laboratory dungeon made the variety of horrors especially clear. He was used to buffed versions of standard mobs, but then he ran into an ogre chimera, a beast with a goblin head wielding a massive hammer. He was busy wondering if the extra head actually made it stronger when the chimera swung the hammer down. The hero dodged just in time, only for the monster to spit a glob of venom at him. Kang Hyun shielded himself with a magic blast, but when he looked back, the stone wall where the acid hit was literally melting. Honestly, the danger did not matter anymore. The hero already had his eyes on that massive hammer as a trophy. At that same moment, a few other awakened entered the dungeon. Instead of clearing monsters, they cornered a lone female archer. Closed spaces like this are perfect for crimes. But suddenly they heard a strange, heavy scraping sound echoing down the corridor. A moment later, Kang Hyun emerged from the shadows, dragging the massive hammer across the floor because of its sheer weight. The group ahead froze in their tracks while watching the stranger. The hero decided to try an attack, but because of the narrow space, the hammer just got stuck in the ceiling. Only with effort did he drop the hammer to the ground, leaving an impressive dent. Wielding this hammer is not yet convenient for Kang Hyun, so he put it into his inventory. The gang leader was amused by this absurdity, and he jumped forward, raising his sword for an attack. But his overconfident expression was quickly erased by a heavy slap from the hero. Kang Hyun lifted him by the hair and pressed his own sword to his throat, taking the attacker hostage. Despite this, the rest of the gang rushed forward. Obviously, they were not very interested in the well-being of their leader. That makes it easier. Kang Hyun dropped the sword and instead grabbed the guy by the hair and the crotch, using him like a battering ram, hitting the bandits with their foreheads. What happened dampened their ardor a little, but not the ardor of the hero. He noticed the trembling from fear of the bandits ahead, but was rapidly approaching them with a new weapon. The fight took more time than Kang Hyun calculated, because awakened in a dungeon of this difficulty are obviously not weaklings. The girl called out to him to bow and thank him for the help. Despite the calm attitude of the hero to what happened, Shin Sona refuses to address him otherwise than master. In addition, she very persistently asks him to teach her to be stronger. Apparently, Kang Hyun still managed to recruit a member into the guild. Whatever the case, their paths were supposed to part ways here, but it turned out the girl did not know the way to the portal. The hero has no time to delay, but Shin Sona herself asked to go further with him. Even if she is not very strong, she will definitely be able to protect herself. Her confidence convinced Kang Hyun, so they went deeper into the dungeon together. After the hero killed the monsters, the girl herself offered to help him and extracted crystals from the bodies of the enemies. He had already begun to think that she would make an excellent stealth archer. Together with her, it is definitely easier and more profitable for him to clear the dungeon. The next room should be the boss room, and Kang Hyun was going to go there alone, but suddenly a system window appeared in front of the two of them. The dungeon core was removed. In the first second, the hero decided that someone had beaten him to it, but then an epiphany came. The boss energy is still felt. This meant only one thing: a gate break. For the first time in history, a 4th-level gate break occurred, and the experts agreed that this crisis was caused artificially. News about this immediately reached the president of the Awakened Alliance, Choi Dong-woo. It also turned out that several dungeons had broken through at once, including a 4th-level dungeon. They had known about it for a long time but put off clearing it, and now the choice had been made for them. He immediately ordered a group of the strongest Awakened to be assembled for clearing. Meanwhile, Kang Hyun was the only one standing guard in front of the gate, destroying the monsters that were breaking out. The others stood behind and were amazed by his strength. Some even offered him help, but he only glared at them maliciously and ordered them to get away. The break had not yet closed, and this meant that the boss had not yet appeared. So the guy started screaming at everyone to leave immediately if they didn't want to die. They were offended that he didn't believe in their strength, but Kang Hyun reminded them that they hadn't killed a single chimera and were only getting in the way. Finally, after seeing his nightmare of a face, the Awakened began to retreat. But not Shin Sona. Kang Hyun specifically asked her to stay so she could cover him from hiding. She was the only one he was ready to trust. Soon 3 chimeras of the same level as the one the hero killed earlier emerged from the rift, and behind them appeared a skeleton in a robe, the boss Lich. He complimented the interesting style of the buildings, which surprised Kang Hyun. Monsters usually do not talk. The Lich noticed that there was only one person in front of him, but then the hero pulled out the hammer, confident that he alone would be enough for the clearing. His self-confidence made the skeleton laugh, especially when Kang Hyun offered them a duel. Of course he refused, but that did not diminish the resolve of the guy. He took off with his hammer at the ready to land the first blow, but the chimeras also ran towards him. Approaching, the hero activated his lion roar, which discouraged the monsters and weakened them. The first hammer blow went to the chimera with the helmet, and it was the last for the monster. The Lich at this time looked at the awakened with regret, because his strength truly amazed him. That is why he decided to enslave the guy to use him. When he pointed his finger at Kang Hyun, red energy enveloped the guy. The Lich was sure that the hero was now under his complete control and ordered him to bow to his new master. But unexpectedly for him, the guy just gave him the middle finger while breaking into a smile. The enslavement magic did not work on him because of his resistance ring. The Lich immediately released his chimeras from their mental leash, and the one with the tiger head rushed into the attack first. Kang Hyun barely had time to harden his skin before the blow sent him flying 100 meters away. The monsters started closing in on the hero, but suddenly an arrow that came from out of nowhere lodged itself into the head of the chimera. Despite the fairly accurate hit, the monster did not die, but it did not last long. Kang Hyun had already gotten to his feet and rushed forward. Grabbing the hammer tighter, he now had a precise indicator of exactly where to strike. With one blow, he drove the arrow deeper, thereby killing the third chimera. Only one remained, but suddenly the stinger of the fourth chimera pierced his chest. The guy immediately dropped the hammer, and grabbing the lizard by the tail, flipped it over him, getting rid of the stinger in his chest at the same time. This time the hero decided to use a light sword. The chimera did not have a single chance to dodge. All the pawns were eliminated, leaving the Lich for dessert. But the skeleton somehow managed to sense that Kang Hyun's magic was running out. Even the hero's regeneration had almost reached its limit, and he still needed to bring the Lich down to earth. He had no strength to jump high enough or throw anything substantial. All these thoughts were interrupted by pain in his heart, and Kang Hyun immediately felt weakness in his body. He started coughing and slipping, he just fell to the ground. But the skeleton knew everything in advance. The poison from the stinger had finally started to work. It would seem that the hero had no chances left, but not this time. First of all, he used all his remaining magic to cleanse himself of the poison, and then used the property of his sword Berserk. This allowed the guy to increase his strength and endurance, but reduced his rationality. He was ready to die just to kill this filth, but suddenly someone approached him from behind, another awakened. Now the battle passed into the responsibility of the awakened alliance, and Kang Hyun was not obliged to continue fighting. Of course he wanted to continue, but a sharp increasing pain in his chest and weakness forced him to fall to the ground and lose consciousness. The next time he opened his eyes again, he was already in the hospital. His sister sat next to his bed and told him that the alliance had already taken care of the gate break. She even met the president of their company when she arrived at the hospital. They did not yet know that Choi Dongwoo had generously paid the guy's medical bills, but the man was most interested in what happened to the escaped Lich. The next day, Kang Hyun was discharged, and he was telling his sister why he could no longer slack off when he heard someone calling his name to the nurse at the registration desk. The man was asking for help to find the guy, and was stunned to learn he had already been checked out. Only by luck, Kang Hyun happened to be standing right near him at that moment. Shin Taegil turned out to be a representative from the Ministry of the Interior and Safety. He invited the hero to a BBQ restaurant, where he brought up the topic of Kang Hyun's cooperation with the government. The number of awakened is growing, and they are incredibly hard to control. That is why a special department was created to support people with abilities by establishing mutually beneficial relationships. Kang Hyun would receive a high salary and full support for his family, including medical expenses. In exchange, the hero would have to answer their call for help whenever it was needed. Overall, this should not affect his daily life. It turns out the president of the alliance and the head of the Donggan Guild were already working with them. After thinking it over, Kang Hyun decided to agree to the proposal. In the evening, he went to get his car, which had been towed to the other side of the city. On the way, Shin Sona was waiting for him. As promised, she brought him all the crystals she had collected from the monster corpses, but could not give them back because the hero had been rushed to the hospital. Out of politeness, he offered to share the reward, but after her refusal, he moved on. He did not get far. The girl called out to him, and with a bow asked him to take her as an apprentice. Meanwhile, the Lich was hiding in the forest, having shamefully fled the battlefield. Suddenly, he heard a voice. Choi Min-jun casually started a conversation during which it was revealed that he was the one who freed the Lich, and now he wanted to make a deal with him. The next day, Kang Hyun brought Shin Sona to An Yusung's house because she had now become part of their guild. The blonde guy decided that it was necessary to test the girl's skills, and she replied with all seriousness that she was ready. But the hero realized that his friend just wanted to have some fun. Together they headed to the rank 4 dungeon Harpy Rock. Shin Sona performed excellently in battle, and An Yusung immediately understood the advantage of a long-range fighter. The girl moved away to carve all the crystals from the corpses when the hero felt the approach of something ominous. Suddenly he swung and struck the air and unexpectedly hit something. Some guy had used an invisibility skill to sneak up on the heroes. This whole situation seemed strange from any angle. Earlier, Shin Taegil had warned him that someone was causing gate breaks on purpose. To eliminate this threat, Kang Hyun had been sent to this dungeon. Therefore, he and his comrades tied up the stranger, and after waking him up with harpy urine, decided to ask a few questions. It was pretty clear the guy they grabbed was the terrorist, but he just smirked and bragged that there were plenty more where he came from. He actually seemed convinced his cause was noble or something. Not that Kang Hyun gave a damn about the motives of these losers. He just wanted the info and he was going to get it out of him one way or another. After a while, the guy was practically begging them to stop beating him just so he could talk. Eventually, the crew dragged the terrorist out of the dungeon to hand him over to the feds. Shin Taegil was pretty rattled by the state the guy was in, but Kang Hyun just shrugged and blamed it on the monsters. Turns out An Yusung had already run into Shin Taegil before, but the blonde guy had flat out refused to work with the government. He figured it sounded like a total bore. The guy told them they would hash it out once they were off the record, and they parted ways. The next day, Kang Hyun went to meet him. Turns out their prisoner had already spilled everything about their base, and the government was planning a full-scale assault in a few weeks. They decided to push the attack back though because something way bigger had come up. A few days back, China cleared a rank 3 dungeon, but the reports conveniently left out the fact that more than half their raid team got wiped out. Dungeons were getting a hell of a lot tougher, and China had made the mistake of sending a bunch of low-tier cannon fodder. Now the government was scrambling to build a team to clear a rank 3 dungeon right in the middle of Seoul called the Venandi Forest. Usually you can just destroy the core to stop a gate break, but every single team that went into this place failed that mission. The Venandi Forest was set to pop in less than 2 weeks, and the monsters inside could shred through Awakened like paper. Doing this in the middle of a populated city meant the casualties would be a total nightmare, way worse than the first break. The deal was that Kang Hyun had to join the raid, but he also had to form an official guild, since he wasn't allowed to go in solo. Of course, the government promised to fast-track all the paperwork and fund the whole thing for him. Kang Hyun had been planning to start a guild anyway, so getting it all handed to him on a silver platter was a pretty sweet setup. A little later, Kang Hyun decided to meet up with An Yusung and Shin Sona to talk shop about their guild. He broke down why they needed to get everything locked in ASAP, and honestly both of them were actually stoked to be part of such a high-stakes raid. First things first, they had to lay down some ground rules. No picking pointless fights, treat everyone with some decency and respect, and most importantly, get stronger than absolutely everyone else. The only thing left was to pick a name, but none of the ones the others tossed out felt like a good fit. Finally, Kang Hyun dropped the one that clicked with all 3 of them. A few days later, the list of guilds participating in the raid hit the net. It was a stacked lineup: Dangan the Awakened Alliance, Fire Dragon Immortal Guild, Guardians Black Knights, and of course Badass Guild. Shin Taegil was straight up baffled by the name choice, but Kang Hyun kept insisting it was edgy and memorable enough. The big guild meeting was set for Monday morning, and An Yusung along with Shin Sona were stuck waiting around for their leader to show up late. He rolled in 5 minutes behind schedule, and he was wearing this ridiculous oversized t-shirt with some cartoon character on it. Apparently he was trying to look more approachable for the kids so they wouldn't be so creeped out by his face, but from what they said he had mostly just made a few toddlers start bawling their eyes out. Meanwhile, all the other top-tier guilds were already sitting in the office holding up the whole meeting, waiting on just 2 guilds, which was making Shin Taegil absolutely lose his mind, since he was the one who vouched for Badass Guild. Kang Hyun wasn't picking up his phone, and An Yusung thought he was just getting spam calls, but then he cheerily told the guy that Kang Hyun had gotten himself into a street fight with another guild leader. Not just any leader though, the head of the second strongest guild in the entire country. It all started when they were trying to catch an elevator, but some random dude butted in at the last second. The stranger guessed they were heading to the guild meeting and introduced himself as Park Hyun, the leader of the Fire Dragon Guild. Everything was chill until his third guy tried to squeeze in too. All that heavy armor triggered an overload. Kang Hyun thought it was pretty weird for them to be decked out in gear a whole week before the dungeon clear even started. Then Park Hyun basically apologized for the trouble and told Kang Hyun's team to get out of the elevator so they could get to the meeting faster. His logic was that his guild was more important because they had way more members and were going to play a huge role. In his head, some no-name guild was supposed to just step aside for the big shots. An Yusung and Shin Sona were annoyed as hell, but Kang Hyun was straight up livid at that attitude. Oh boy, you should know better than to be this stuck up. That was the spark that led to their brawl in the elevator and made them late. But hey, everyone was finally there, and Shin Tae-gil rushed to get the meeting moving. During the intros it came out that Badass Guild only had 3 members, which really set Park Hyun off. He thought this was some high-level event where a bottom-tier guild had no business being. Not everyone was feeling the hate though. The leader of the Immortal Guardians was actually impressed by the confidence and pride the leader of such a tiny squad had. A few other leaders called for order, which finally shut Park Hyun up. But An Yu-sung suddenly nudged Kang Hyun and pointed at the head of the Guardians Guild. Something was definitely off about the guy, and the blonde already started pulling out his mace ready to take him out. Is he just this crazy? Kang Hyun managed to stop the guy at the very last second, but everyone was already on edge after seeing the weapon come out. The Guardians Guild members were especially rattled and kept looking to their leader for orders, but the guy just sat there silent and wouldn't even look up. When he finally did, his teeth were clenched, his eyes looked totally insane, and his skin was covered in bulging veins. Bursts of raw energy started leaking out of him, which left everyone in the room confused and terrified. Gasping for air, he finally stood up, but in a flash he lunged out of nowhere and attacked one of his own subordinates. It was obvious the guy had completely lost his marbles, which was exactly what An Yu-sung had clocked before things even turned south. The blonde guy wasn't about to back down now either. He ripped his arm out of Kang Hyun's grip and swung his mace again to finish off the other guild leader, but the leader countered with a strike so fast and heavy it sent An Yu-sung flying right back into Kang Hyun. Of course the blonde guy didn't take it personally and just laughed off how stupid it was to try and pull a stunt like that in a meeting full of the strongest guild leaders around. Taking down that psycho was a real pain, and the conference room was a total wreck by the time the guild leader finally dropped dead. Nobody could calm him down, so killing him was the only way to stop the threat. Now with everyone standing around the corpse, they were all wondering what the hell had just happened. But Kang Hyun was more interested in how An Yu-sung had smelled trouble before anyone else did, since even he hadn't sensed any change in the mana around them. The only explanation was some kind of special ability. It was clear now that even the blonde guy's most unhinged moves actually had a solid reason behind them. Even if Kang Hyun was honestly pretty disgusted by the way his buddy looked so satisfied after all that violence. After that whole disaster, they decided to just run a group video call with all the guilds, instead of meeting in person. On the way out, Shin Tae-gil caught up with Kang Hyun to talk about the government support package for their new guild. They'd already hooked them up with an office and told them they could start moving in right away. Naturally, the 3 of them headed straight to the address. The place turned out to be huge, packed with gear, all the amenities you'd need, and even a little kitchen. It was pretty empty though, which was probably so they could deck it out however they wanted. While the guys were busy arguing about where to put the shower and making sure the fridge was stocked with beer, Shin Sona reminded them that the video call was about to start. Soon enough, the screen was flooded with the faces of various guild leaders. Everyone was ready to finally talk shop about the upcoming raid. Of course, everyone was buzzing about what happened to Park Si-hyun, the dead guild leader, but the investigation was still ongoing. Then they went over the intel they managed to scrap together from the failed runs in Vinandi Forest. They'll be running into the usual mobs, but because of the dungeon rank they're insanely strong. They move like trained armies, and some of them even have special abilities. After the call wrapped up, Shin Tae-gil was left feeling pretty uneasy about whether this raid was actually going to go off without a hitch. The next day, a super energetic kid named Han Jae-moon showed up at the Badass Guild office. The government sent him over to handle all the boring admin stuff for the guild. Honestly though, he looked way more stoked just to be hanging out with his idols, An Yu-sung and Shin Sona. The girl decided it was the perfect time to bring up guild uniforms to help boost morale. She had already taken the liberty of ordering these leather jackets decked out with skull graphics and the guild name slapped on them. Kang Hyun shot the idea down immediately, since the look totally missed the mark on what they were actually about. Suddenly she started bawling her eyes out, but it turned out she was just using eye drops. She kept up the act and went on about how hard she worked on them. In reality, she had just found some overpriced shop online that uses AI for designs, and fell for their lie about having 100 years of experience making gear for Awakened. After that whole sob story, Kang Hyun just couldn't keep being the rational guy anymore. An Yu-sung didn't help either, since he was busy acting like Kang Hyun was the bad guy for calling her out. Even though they were totally playing him, they ended up keeping the uniforms anyway. Shin Tae-gil had also thrown in a van for them to get around along with the office space and the new accountant. But when Kang Hyun saw the ride, he was looking at a total nightmare covered in ugly stickers and decals with the guild name all over it. A masterpiece of bad taste from An Yu-sung. By now, Han Jae-moon's high energy was starting to take a bit of a hit. They eventually hit the road in that eyesore of a van despite Kang Hyun's endless griping. But they hit a snag on one of the streets thanks to a traffic jam. There was some kind of brawl between Awakened up ahead, so the hero decided to go check it out. He barely had time to close the van door when a full-grown guy came flying straight into it. An Yu-sung jumped out right after him, not because he was worried about a person getting totaled, but because he was freaked out about his precious ugly van since the impact had ripped the door clean off. The guy who slammed into them eventually came to his senses, but he definitely wasn't out of the woods yet. The fight between the two guilds ahead was getting even more heated, and those troublemakers showed zero signs of cooling off. Everyone was obviously worried about the guy who got launched, but they were pretty sure the hit hadn't done any real lasting damage. Just then they saw someone walking their way. It was only when he got close that they realized he was carrying their beaten-up teammate like a sack of potatoes. Kang Hun dumped the guy at their feet like a rag doll, and demanded to know what the hell they were doing causing a ruckus and smashing up his ride. But honestly, what pissed the hero off the most was that they were stopping him from going to get some barbecue. A few of the troublemakers recognized the badass guild, and the second they saw who it was they started shaking in their boots. At first the heroes tried to talk it out and get some compensation for the property damage and the mental trauma, but the rival guild leader just went full aggro and charged them. A few minutes later that entire squad was sprawled out unconscious on the asphalt, while their opponents sheepishly walked up to Kang Hun, thanked him for the assist, and offered to treat him to some meat. Jo Dong-won turned out to be a guild leader, and he really didn't hold back on the meat or the drinks. But even though Kang Hun was playing it cool, he caught on pretty quick that he wasn't just being thanked, the guy was looking for a favor. Joe felt awkward about asking, but since he'd been caught red-handed, he decided to come clean. He spilled the tea about his guild Haesun and the Jungjin Guild, who had a deal to split their region so everyone got a fair share of the loot from dungeon clears. About a week ago though, Jungjin started raiding their territory and cleaning out dungeons that weren't theirs. The two guilds were pretty much equals in terms of members and pull, so they'd had a non-aggression pact since day one. Jungjin breaking that contract was what led to that street brawl earlier. An Yu-sung was all for getting involved, but Kang Hun didn't see the point. There was zero upside for them. That was when Jo Dong-won dropped the real reason they needed help. He already mentioned they were evenly matched, but the game changer was this mysterious drug circulating through the Jungjin Guild. Now he had Kang Hun's full attention. Word on the street was that the stuff was juicing up the user's abilities. With the massive raid going down in 2 days, Kang Hun decided he'd help Haesun out, but only after they wrapped up this other job. When the big day finally came, all the hand-picked guilds gathered at the gate, and Shin Tae-gil stepped up to give a speech about honor and saving humanity, before wrapping it up by begging everyone to make it back alive. Once they stepped through the gate, the teams landed smack in the middle of Vainandi Forest. Even though Choi Dong-woo wasn't leading the raid, he was the guy in charge of explaining how the signal flares worked and what each color meant. After that, the guilds split up to fan out and hunt for the core. But the head of the alliance stopped the badass squad in their tracks to suggest they team up. Before long they ran headfirst into the mobs and were totally blown away by the sheer numbers, not to mention how fast and hard these things hit. Choi Dong-woo immediately started barking orders about formations and positioning. Meanwhile, An Yu-sung didn't give a damn about tactics, he just charged straight into the fray with his mace. He wasn't scared at all, he was just straight up bloodthirsty. Kang Hyun wasn't far behind, turning the whole battlefield into an absolute slaughterhouse. Pretty soon the other guys weren't just terrified of the monsters anymore, they were getting spooked by these two lunatics. By the time the sun went down, the fighting had wrapped up and everyone set up camp to catch their breath. Even though they got off to a solid start, Kang Hyun decided that from tomorrow their guilds were going to split up and do their own thing. It was all because of a stupid argument Park Hyun started. They made a bet on who could contribute more to the raid or land the finishing blow on the main boss. The guy actually put an Easter egg item on the table. Based on the description, it was obvious to Kang Hyun that this thing had to be from the administrator. Even so, Kang Hyun played it cool and acted like he had no idea what that item really was, but Park Hyun wasn't having it. He told him not to play dumb since they were both part of the government's program. Either way, Kang Hyun had to put something on the table for the bet, so Park Hyun just smirked and told him he'd have to join Fire Dragon Guild for a year and follow orders to the letter if he lost. They shook on it, and as soon as the sun came up, the two guilds went their separate ways, with Badass heading in the complete opposite direction from everyone else. Meanwhile, the Fire Dragon Guild was in a massive heap of trouble. They had a bunch of guys dead and even more seriously wounded. The culprit? The Vainandi monsters, a tribe of lizard-like creatures that clearly saw them as prey rather than a threat. Tracking them was impossible and way too dangerous, so the only move left was to wipe out the monster's base. Park Hyun saw only one way to do it. Burn the whole forest to the ground. His right-hand man tried to talk him out of it, but the look of pure desperate rage in Park Hyun's eyes meant there was no stopping him. He whipped out his staff and aimed a fire crystal at the trees and let it rip. At the same time, Kang Hyun's squad ran into some Vainandi too. At first the monsters didn't attack, they just started screeching, which An Yu-sung figured was a warning. But they were here to clear the place, so all three of them bolted forward the next second. To their surprise, the Vainandi nimbly leaped from the ground up into the trees, keeping their distance from the intruders. Shinsona was down to start a fight, but the blonde guy kept pushing them to keep moving, looking for something that would actually be fun. The second they started walking, those lizards started raining attacks down on them from the canopy. Kang Hyun realized that if they kept moving, they'd just draw in even more enemies from the trees. There was only one way to handle this: grab one of the lizards as a hostage and force the rest of them to surrender. His plan to grab one Vainandi backfired hard because the others clearly didn't give a damn about their buddy and just opened fire on the whole group without holding back. The trio barely made it out alive after the lizards took out their own hostage, and now they needed a new plan. But suddenly a red flare shot up into the sky. That meant some guild was in serious trouble. Turns out the Guardians Guild had run into a massive army of goblins and orcs that were picking them off one by one. Kang Sawan, the deputy leader, was the one who fired the distress signal, but he honestly didn't think anyone would actually show up. He could have blamed his useless leader or the need to save face, but deep down he knew the only person to blame was his own greed. His fighters were being pushed back, and it was only a matter of time before they were wiped out. Then out of nowhere, a third party jumped in. The badass guild jumped into the thick of action. Kang Hyun instantly maxed out his hidden abilities, pulled out a massive hammer and started crushing monsters left and right. Shin Sona rained down arrows from the sky while An Yu Song dove into the melee with his mace. Kang Hyun took down 3 ogres in minutes, but more enemies just kept pouring in. That was when the Dongan Guild rolled up on the battlefield. With some real teamwork, they helped shred the rest of the horde, basically saving the Guardians from total annihilation. Kang Siwon couldn't help but notice that neither of those guilds had taken a single loss while his own guys were getting slaughtered. The field was littered with his men who had been alive just a few hours ago. He only snapped out of his daze when Kang Hyun yelled that they were all holding a meeting to talk strategy. Meanwhile, Park Hyun's brilliant plan had spiraled way out of control. The fire was impossible to stop, thanks to the unpredictable wind. The flames were devouring trees at a crazy speed, and the guy had no choice but to scream at everyone to run for their lives. By sunset, they stacked up the bodies of the fallen and prepped them for transport, while the guild leaders huddled around a campfire to figure out how to track down the dungeon core. Kang Hyun looked pretty surprised when he told them he all already knew exactly where it was. Han Se-yoon was blown away by how sharp his senses were when it came to reading energy. Everyone was ready to head out and beat the midnight deadline, but Kang Siwon suggested they wait it out, since everyone needed to rest and there might be plenty of trouble ahead. Han Se-yoon wasn't having it since the element of surprise was their biggest asset. It was obvious that Kang Siwon was the only one not ready to roll, considering the state his guild was in. Only Kang Hyun wasn't afraid to call out the elephant in the room. The guy was banking on the strong guilds to basically tow his weak crew along. He had clearly forgotten the reality of the situation they were in. In dungeons, the weak die, but the strong shouldn't have to bend over backwards to carry the dead weight. The whole point of the raid was to clear the dungeon, not take a sightseeing tour, and Kang Se-hun's failure to grasp that basic truth was starting to really piss the hero off. By the time midnight hit, the 3-guild alliance reached the core, which was surrounded by hordes of elite monsters. There were so many enemies that Kang Hyun suggested they stop trying to kill every single one, and just carve a path straight to the center. Finally, their hard work paid off, and they broke through to the core. By this point, the rest of the guilds had caught up too. With all that extra help, clearing out the monsters became a cakewalk. But that was when Kang Hyun spotted the dungeon boss closing in. The hero launched himself, instantly flying over the heads of the monster army as he whipped out his giant hammer and took the boss out with one clean shot to the head. Turns out the only real difficulty in this dungeon was the sheer number of mobs, because the boss itself was a total pushover. Even so, Kang Hyun got the Vainandi sword and Vainandi bow as his reward. Like Choi Dong-woo had guessed, the death toll was pretty high, but at least the city was safe now. They were just about to start looting and splitting the spoils when things went sideways. Shin Sona was the first to spot the wall of fire roaring toward them. Everyone was confused at first, but then they saw the Fire Dragon Guild running for their lives with a massive swarm of monsters hot on their heels. Some random dude decided he wasn't gonna wait for the monsters and made a run for the core, but Kim Hee-eun stopped him just in time. Even though the boss was toast and the monsters shouldn't have been able to leave the portal, there had been cases where they broke out anyway because they were panicking, just like they were now. Protecting the civilians in the city was still the #1 priority. The guy wouldn't quit, probably just as panicked as the monsters, so Han Se-yoon immediately ordered her people to defend the path to the core. Those idiots refused to get that trying to run away was just gonna pave the way for the monsters to get out, and one of them even tried to jump her when she ordered them to deal with the horde. What an absolute moron. Before she could even pull her sword, Kang Hyun had already dealt with the guy. He sent him flying back 10 meters and sided with the girl without asking any questions. The monsters were just sprinting away from the fire, so they weren't exactly looking for a fight. Han Se-yoon calculated that taking them down should be easier that way. Kang Hyun decided to take the main job on himself and told the rest of them just to handle the stragglers that slipped past him. Trying to take on a load like that alone was straight up insanity, but the hero flat out refused any help he was offered. He popped every buff he had and triggered his berserker skill. Shin Sona couldn't hide how worried she was for their leader, but An Yu-sung was surprisingly chill. He'd been in the trenches with the guy plenty of times, and he knew he wasn't the type to just drop dead. A second later the Fire Dragon Guild blew past him, and he didn't wait for the tide of monsters to reach him. He bolted forward and wove between them, taking them out with terrifying speed. The Awakened hanging back were hyped as hell, but soon a few monsters slipped through. With a bit of teamwork, Kang Hyun's support crew took out the goblins and orcs that dodged his lethal blade. An Yu-sung was having the time of his life until he saw an enemy arrow sink right into Shin Sona. Not her. Administrator, take me instead. Kang Hyun heard her scream and got distracted long enough for a goblin to hack his arm clean off. But the look on that goblin's face when the hero just grew a new one back in a split second was priceless. With one swing of his sword he dropped that one and took out another jerk who'd gotten way too close to Shin Sona. Right then another monster crept up behind him and skewered him with a spear. Seriously, how many times was he gonna get hit? No matter how he tried to weave his skills together, he kept leaving himself wide open. Instead of hardening his skin, he channeled all his mana into a massive magical blast and turned a whole group of monsters in front of him into absolute hamburger. The shockwave hit him too, but his regeneration kicked in and his flesh knit itself back together in a heartbeat. After making sure Shin Sona was going to be alright, he told her to haul ass to the Dangan Guild and tell them to bail the second they saw his signal. She was a wreck worrying about him, but she listened and took off while Kang Hyun charged forward with that damn spear still sticking out of his chest. He kept mowing monsters down methodically until the forest fire got too close to the dungeon core. That was the moment he sent his signal, the kind of blast they definitely couldn't miss, and he just obliterated the core with a final magical explosion. Han Seon was floored when she saw him just wave them off like he was saying, "Get out of here." Everyone scrambled to clear the dungeon, and though it took a little convincing from An Yu-sung for Shin Sona to finally move, they all made it out to the other side just in time to watch the gate. They were all on edge waiting for it to close when Kang Hyun suddenly stumbled out with that same spear still jammed in his chest and just froze. The blonde guy realized with a grin that the hero had just passed out on his feet, and he gave him a light nudge to help him hit the dirt. The raid was officially in the books. Now it was time to settle the score with the masterminds behind the crisis, the Fire Dragon Guild. Out of nowhere, the hero sat up and reminded the guy about their bet before promptly passing out again. Next time he came to, he was in the hospital with Shin Sona and An Yu-sung waiting for him. Turns out the whole country had been glued to the screen watching the aftermath of that first rank 3 dungeon clear. The Guardians had lost about half their people in there, and the Fire Dragon Guild got slapped with charges for trying to sabotage the raid. Serves them right. Both guilds had vanished from the nation's top 10 list. Meanwhile, the stories about Kang Hyun's heroics were enough to launch his own guild straight to the top. It had been a few days since the raid wrapped up, and Kang Hyun was still AWOL despite his crazy regeneration. With the leader gone, the office was a total bore, and An Yu-sung and Shin Sona were just goofing off without even noticing Han Jae-moon, who had been pulling all-nighters for days trying to keep his head above water with all the guild's paperwork and logistics. But just like that, the hero showed up at the office today. Seeing his boss actually made the accountant perk up, hoping for some help, but the guy just told him to clean off his desk, which completely crushed his spirits. His manic expression even freaked Kang Hyun out a bit, so he made a beeline for the exit. Finally, the guy was able to hand over the bow that dropped from the dungeon boss to his friend. The girl was over the moon about such a valuable gift, while the hero got absolutely nothing for An Yu-sung. Then the doorbell rang and it turned out to be Kang Se-hwan from the Guardians Guild. What he didn't expect was that Kang Hyun had zero clue who he was, and he just hung up on him. Even after a joint raid and actual face-to-face talk. Haha, poor Kang Se-hwan. Eventually the guy managed to talk his way inside even though our hero still had no clue who he was. It wasn't until the redhead bowed and thanked him for the save that it finally clicked. This was the same wimp who was ready to bail and sabotage the whole raid just to save his own skin. But before Kang Se-hwan could even get to his main point, the doorbell rang again. Han Jae-moon nearly had a heart attack when he saw the guest Jo Dong-won covered in blood, bruises and gashes had dragged himself all the way over here. They patched him up as best they could, but he barely seemed to care about his own injuries. He was there to beg for help getting his brother back. He'd been kidnapped by the goons from the Jungjin Guild, the same punks who'd wrecked their van earlier. This beef had been simmering for a long time, but thanks to some mystery drug juicing up the Jungjin members, Haesun just couldn't fight back, and their body count was piling up. Kidnapping the leader's brother Jo Sung-chan was the final straw. The cops were useless as usual, preferring to steer clear of anything involving Awakened. Jo Dong-won blamed the drug for turning them into total psychos, and since Kang Hyun had already made a deal with him, he didn't see any reason to flake on the guy now. As the badass crew geared up to head out, they noticed Kang Suwan still tagging along, trying to finish what he started earlier. He played it off like he was just there to help in the guild war, but he dropped a bombshell. The Guardian's former leader had shown the exact same symptoms as the guys on the drug. It sounded like a conspiracy theory at first, but when you put the pieces together, it actually made a lot of sense. News that Kang Hyun's squad was backing Haesun made its way to the leader of Jungjin instantly. Instead of being worried, she looked absolutely thrilled, like she'd hit the jackpot and found a way to take out two birds with one stone. Man, that woman is completely unhinged. With Kang Si-won unexpectedly forced into the driver's seat, the whole crew set off to settle the score. Trying to negotiate with such a dangerous enemy with such a small squad was a recipe for disaster, so Kang Hyun started dialing up his contacts for backup. First on the chopping block was Shin Taegil, who got pulled away from his work with a talk about skill-enhancing drugs and a demand to send reinforcements immediately to finish them off today. Any attempt to explain why such an operation was impossible fell on deaf ears because Kang Hyun just hung up. Next was Choi Dong-woo, but the alliance always steered clear of guild turf wars. In the end, it was clear nobody was coming to help, but the hero didn't care. He already had plenty of experience wiping out guilds solo, which totally blew Jo Dongwon's mind. Anyway, a few hours later, the crew rolled up to one of the Jungjin Guild's dungeons. These undead-infested spots didn't usually have the best loot, but sometimes they dropped something valuable. Things weren't exactly running smooth for the guys guarding the operation, though. The managers were chewing out the grunts for being lazy and cutting off their drug supply. Suddenly, a few mysterious silhouettes appeared on the edge of the woods. A few minutes later, the captain tried to light a cigarette, but his lighter wouldn't spark. His face went pale when he realized there wasn't a soul in sight. A rustle in the bushes made him whip out a knife. Sounds started coming from everywhere, breaking the dead silence and sending him into a full-blown panic attack. Then out of nowhere, the source of the noise, Kang Hyun, was standing right next to him. Seeing a face like that would have made me drop dead on the spot. Later that night, a few terrified survivors from the dungeon broke into the guild leader's office with a message from their attackers. Kang Hyun wasn't hiding who he was, and he demanded they hand over Jo Dongwon's brother, or he'd keep destroying every single one of their dungeons. She clearly wasn't expecting that level of arrogance from such a tiny guild. The next day, they actually agreed to meet up at the dungeon Kang Hyun had been tearing apart. Right on cue, a few figures showed up at the tent dragging Jo Sung-chan along, who was barely even conscious. The deal was supposed to include the drugs too, but when Kang Hyun checked the guy's pockets, he only found a few measly pills instead of the full stash they'd promised. One of the goons started losing his mind over how bold these outsiders were being, but the sheer terror on the deputy leader's face shut him up fast. Wu Jingqiang had already crossed paths with this monster in human skin once before, when he'd made the mistake of underestimating him in a street fight. The whole meetup was obviously a trap for the badass guild, but you could tell just by looking at the hero's face that he wasn't even remotely caught off guard. A few hours later, the guild leader got the report on how it went down. Everyone had come back either critically injured or teetering on the edge of death. She'd been expecting her doped-up fighters to just smear these justice-seeking brats across the pavement. She flew into a blind rage and started wrecking her office, scaring her secretary half to death. The girl could see that the constant use of the drug was completely frying the leader's mental state. Once she finally stopped trashing the place, she ordered the entire guild budget dumped into buying more of the stuff. After she cooled down a bit, she started trying to figure out why Kang Hyun had even bothered to stick his nose into the drug business and the guild war in the first place. If she'd only bothered to talk to her deputy, who had returned without a single unbroken bone in his body, she might have understood. After a few run-ins with the guy, he'd already figured out the truth. This absolute lunatic was doing all of this purely for the fun of it. Everyone was bracing themselves for Hong Chae-young to round up her goons and declare an all-out guild war. But in the end, the whole thing fizzled out before it even really started. Kang Hyun was just slacking off at the guild as usual. After 2 weeks of waiting for a move following the beatdown he gave those messengers, there was zero reaction. Still, the hero was convinced that Young Jin was rotting from the inside out thanks to him. Once he finished dealing with them, he reported everything to Shin Taegil the very next day. The guy was clearly not thrilled about the news despite the outcome and Kang Hyun's supposedly good intentions. Plus, they had finally snagged samples of those drugs that a bunch of top-tier guilds were already hooked on. But Kang Hyun wasn't about to just hand them over for free. Soon after, reports started flooding in about the nasty side effects and the danger those boosters pose to the public. The hero was just pretending to be satisfied with the slow burn resolution when En Yu-sung suddenly flinched and bolted for the door at high speed. Kang Hyun was still staring in confusion at the closing door when a blinding flash went off behind him, followed by a deafening explosion. The force of it just shredded concrete and steel beams to bits. But of course the guy didn't have a scratch on him, though the same couldn't be said for his clothes. An Yu-sung rushed back in. He had this weird knack for sensing trouble before it hit. Kang Hyun just screamed at him for bailing without explaining anything. Down on the street, people were losing their minds, and it's no wonder. The hero kept blinding everyone with his nudity until his buddy finally shamed him into covering up. Both of them were just relieved no one got hurt in the blast, clearly forgetting there was someone else in the office. Han Jamun. It took a while, but they finally called an ambulance and got him to the hospital. The government caught wind of the incident and Shin Tae-gil showed up at the office to meet with— was that a descendant of Jonathan Joestar? An Yu-sung clearly had a taste for high fashion since he was the genius behind that outfit. During the talk it became obvious that neither of them had a clue who pulled the attack. Kang Hyun had way too many enemies who wanted him dead to even count. But everything clicked when a helicopter flew over the city dropping flyers everywhere. One look at a scrap of paper was all it took to know exactly who was behind the hit. Kang Hyun and An Yu-sung didn't waste a second and headed straight for the Jungjin Guild, whose name was plastered all over those flyers. Suddenly Shin Tae-gil offered his help even though he'd just brushed them off earlier, citing a busy schedule. But the game had changed because now they were dealing with the actual dungeon terrorists. The government had tracked the leader's identity and linked him to a group of nearly 100 people involved in the scheme. Since Kang Hyun had helped secure a key witness, Shin Tae-gil was finally ready to help take down the whole organization. Back when the hero was busy beatdown style interrogating a terrorist, the guy had coughed up his boss's name, Choi Min-jun. Right about then, Hong Chae-young was showing up for a meeting with that very man, since his drug was the reason she'd attacked the other guild in the first place. There was no turning back now, and everything she'd built was sinking fast. As a last resort, she decided she'd at least try to tear out the root of the problem so no one else would suffer. She set up an ambush, but she clearly had no idea what kind of monster she was dealing with. Streams of energy suddenly erupted from Choi Min-jun's back, pinning everyone down and slamming the guild leader into a tree. The sickening crunch of hostages' necks snapping followed immediately. Choi Min-jun had zero mercy for anyone who dared cross him, but he had a special role in mind for Hong Chae-young. He was planning to pump her full of a massive dose of the drug for a little experiment, just so she'd be useful to him one last time. Meanwhile, Kang Hyun's squad stormed into the Jungjin headquarters only to find a silent wreck of a building that looked like it had been trashed in a hurry. Even Kang Si-won noticed they were obviously scrubbing their tracks, but his mere presence there was starting to annoy the hero again. They pushed deeper into the building, searching for any scrap of evidence. Naturally, the best place to look was the guild leader's office. Inside, they found one survivor, a woman making primal animal noises who looked exactly like the Guardian's leader did in his final moments. Back during the tutorial, Jung Chae-yeon and her friend both became awakened. She made it to the 4th stage herself, but she never really cared about the hero life, unlike her friend who was a firefighter before the world went to hell and wanted to use her powers to save even more people. Sadly, that friend died during a raid, but it gave Jung Chae-yeon a new purpose in life. She took up her friend's mantle just to keep that dream alive. The guild leader decided to pour her heart out to Kang Hyun, but she really should have known better than to look for sympathy from him. She at least realized her actions couldn't be justified by her old sob story anymore, but she still hoped for some kind of forgiveness from Kang Hyun, even though the guy literally had no idea who she was. Her own tragic realization just made her laugh. She'd lost to a bunch of simpletons, but simpletons who actually had a moral compass. Before she lost herself completely, she told him everything she knew about the big bad Choi Min-jun. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, she finished her story and warned them never to underestimate how terrifying that man really is. Suddenly, the drug hit critical mass, and Jung Chae-yeon started losing control of her own body. Her last request was for him to kill her quickly and take down Choi Min-jun so he couldn't hurt anyone else. The second Kang Hyun drew his sword, she lunged at him, and he ended her life with a single clean strike. That was the pathetic final curtain for the Jungjin Guild. Kang Hyun was honestly hoping for a more exciting fight, but he knew all roads led to Choi Min-jun anyway. At least the ring he looted from Jung Chae-yeon was a decent upgrade. He went back to shooting the breeze with An Yu-sung and Shin So-na while nearby Kang Si-won watched them in total shock. He couldn't wrap his head around their recklessness, but he had to admit this tiny guild had something special. They had what the Guardians and Jungjin lacked, a strong leader who wouldn't cave to temptation when lives were on the line. Making a split-second decision, he looked at Kang Hyun and begged him to take over as the leader of the Guardians Guild. Even after they left the ruined building, Kang Si-won kept stalking the hero, hopping. He could still talk him into taking the Guardians under his wing. But with every word out of his mouth, Kang Hyun's blood pressure spiked. Eventually, only a direct threat of a beatdown forced Kang Si-won to back off and admit defeat. Now the crew had to find a temporary office since theirs had been turned into Swiss cheese by the explosion. But a sudden scream from a retreating Kang Si-won changed their priorities. He was being chased by a mob of aggressive lunatics. Reports started flooding in from everywhere about hundreds of citizens losing their minds and attacking anyone in sight. The government tried to contain the chaos with the army, but the soldiers were panicking because their moral compass made them hesitate to shoot civilians. Even when the crazies lunged at them, the troops just froze up. Luckily for them, Kang Hyun had much more flexible principles. He made short work of the madmen and gave the military a blunt lecture about growing a spine to protect the peaceful citizens from the attackers. There was simply no reasoning with people who had snapped because of the drug. This mysterious wave of aggression swallowed all of Korea, but it was finally suppressed after 24 hours. In the meantime, the Badass Guild crashed at a house rented by the government until Shin Tae-gil could score them a new office. Kang Hyun called him up to say thanks for the hideout and then casually asked if he could get his hands on a poison with no antidote, along with some textbooks on poison resistance. The man agreed to look into it but warned right away that it would cost a fortune, possibly billions. The hero realized it was finally time to get serious about stacking some cash. Shin Sona suggested they start selling guild merch, but the guys weren't exactly jumping for joy at the idea. Honestly, that's probably for the best. In the end, the hero caved and put Han Jae-moon in charge of developing the merch. The girl actually got her way, although it's safe to say the guy wasn't exactly thrilled about it. It was pretty weird when someone knocked on their door on such a gloomy, rainy day, and of course the visitor turned out to be Kang Si-won. Nobody wanted to let him in, and everyone was mostly just shocked he'd managed to track the place down at all. The guy was persistent, so Kang Hyun told An Yu-sung to handle the situation. But then Shin Sona dropped a key detail. There were actually 3 visitors at the door. The other 2 were the brothers Jo Sung-chan and Jo Dong-won. Turns out Kang Si-won had squeezed the location out of the government and blabbed to the other 2. The big question was why this trio had even showed up on the guild's doorstep. They wouldn't even give the redhead the time of day, but the other 2 admitted they were so impressed by Kang Hyun's help that they wanted to thank him and beg him to become their guild leader. At first the hero shut them down, but when they presented him with premium quality beef, he suddenly realized these were truly wonderful people he couldn't possibly refuse. Unable to help himself, Kang Si-won promised to buy the absolute highest grade of beef that very day if his guild was taken under the wing too. Kang Hyun saw no reason to say no after that. As usual, all the extra headaches were destined to fall on Han Jae-moon's shoulders. He finally snapped and begged for some assistance from the 2 guilds now under his care. Kang Hyun didn't miss a beat and promoted the guy to team leader, completely backfiring on his plan to do less work. During the introductions, it turned out the reps from the Guardians and Hasten were way lower level than the badass originals. The hero couldn't wait to start clearing dungeons with this new roster. After all, there's no better way to get strong than teetering on the edge of life and death. The newcomers immediately sensed something was very wrong, but unfortunately it was too late to back out. The next day, right in front of the gates, Kang Hyun held a formal initiation ceremony for the Badass Guild, explained the rules to the rookies, and invited everyone straight into the dungeon. Naturally, the hero wanted to know the headcount for the new recruits beforehand. The Guardians were down to just 10 survivors after that last raid, and the death of their leader. The brothers were literally the only 2 left in their guild, so they were joining as a pair. By Kang Hyun's rough estimates, a crowd this size could probably handle a rank 4 dungeon without dropping dead too quickly. Kang Si-won overheard him muttering and turned pale instantly, suddenly feeling a lot less confident about his life choices. The next day, everyone was a nervous wreck before the first joint clear. Well, everyone except the original badass squad who were just there for support. That anxiety didn't get any better once they stepped inside and immediately felt like toddlers facing off against high-level mobs. But Kang Hyun wasn't about to coddle them. He kept barking at everyone to get back up and keep swinging. Kang Si-won was terrified that his fighters were hitting their absolute limit, but that was exactly what the hero wanted. Even the healer was at the end of her rope, having burned through almost all her mana. Kang Hyun had been in her shoes before, and knew that the agony of mana exhaustion was the only way to actually force your stats and skills to evolve. Of course, not everyone there agreed with his sink-or-swim philosophy, but being stuck in a dungeon meant they didn't exactly have a vote. Still, he wasn't actually planning to let them die. He'd prepped special impact-absorbing crystals and timed his interventions perfectly to shield the rookies from any lethal blows. By that point, An Yu-sung and Shin Sona had already rounded up a fresh batch of golems for the recruits to square off against. That evening, Kang Si-won and the survivors from the old Guardians Guild hit up a Korean BBQ joint to decompress and talk about the day from hell. Most of them immediately started ragging on their commander about how Kang Hyun was a complete psycho and his training methods were borderline war crimes. But Si-won stood his ground. He was convinced that this lunatic was the only one who could actually make them strong. Despite the low morale and suggestions to just bail and start their own thing, he told them that their thirst for justice wouldn't mean a damn thing until they had the power to back it up. He asked them to trust him one last time and promised to revisit the conversation in a week. As that week drew to a close, the Badass Guild decided to storm a rank 5 dungeon. This time they weren't alone in there. 2 random scavengers were lurking around, not even bothering with the monsters. They were just there to swipe mana crystals and discarded gear. It didn't take long for those 2 to stumble upon a literal mountain of goblin corpses that hadn't been looted yet. Total jackpot. It wasn't often you saw a gold mine like that left behind, so they nervously started harvesting the stones while keeping their ears open in case the owners came back for their loot. Sure enough, they heard someone approaching, but it was a fresh army of very much alive and very aggressive goblins. Before the monsters could tear the scavengers apart, a pack of absolute madmen burst onto the scene. These people were fighting with zero fear, operating on pure adrenaline and instinct, just like Kang Hyun had beaten into them. The whole mob of nutcases just steamrolled through the horde and kept sprinting deeper into the dungeon, leaving the strangers standing there in total confusion. A week later, the word on the street was that the Badass Guild had basically become one giant Kang Hyun split into a dozen different bodies. Kang Si-won saw the change himself. His once weak and shaky subordinates who used to look for the easy way out were now unrecognizable. When he finally brought up the deal they'd made a week ago, they didn't even want to hear it. They were finally certain they'd found exactly what they needed. The hype reached a fever pitch once the recruits finally got their official guild uniforms and took a tour of the new headquarters. Even the OG crew was obsessed with the new spot. Before letting the mob inside, Kang Hyun had only one rule: don't break the furniture. The setup was a dream. A private cafe on the first floor, a full gym on the second, and a lounge stocked with a beer fridge on the third. That's when the hero finally realized An Yu-sung had been underage this whole time, despite about a million obvious hints. Later that day, Shin Tae-gil called to congratulate Kang Hyun on the massive success of the guild's merch line. But Kang Hyun nearly short-circuited when he found out the #1 bestseller was an action figure of him, a hyper-realistic one with removable clothes. Naturally, his friends suddenly found the floor very interesting and avoided eye contact even when he reached for his sword. According to An Yu-sung, boring keychains and notebooks weren't going to pay the bills, but that logic didn't save him from Kang Hyun's immediate wrath. By nightfall, they had to play nice again because Shin Tae-gil handed them a high-stakes government sting operation. The mission: go undercover, meet a drug dealer, buy the goods, and plant a tracker in the briefcase of cash. Despite their burning desire to just turn everyone into a red smear on the pavement, the goal was strictly deal and track. The sound of gravel crunching outside signaled the arrival of at least 10 people. The barn doors creaked open and the dealers stepped into the light. That was the moment An Yu-sung's sixth sense went into overdrive. He instantly recognized the woman leading the pack. It was Lee Yuri, the same woman whose arm he'd snapped during training. He'd felt something off about her back then, and now he was kicking himself for not just crushing her skull when he had the chance. Everything seemed to be going smoothly at first. The deal was moving along like clockwork. But when it came time to show the product before the trade, the girl's briefcase revealed a magical seal instead of drugs. A massive explosion slammed into Kang Hyun the very next second. Choi Min-jun had designed this device alongside a lich. Somehow those scoundrels found out about the buyer's connection to the government and showed up empty-handed. They were about to leave when they noticed the hero was still on his feet. The blast had damaged his body, but his skills were already knitting him back together. The villains were immediately on edge after seeing Kang Hyun's face without his mask. But the girl was even more terrified when she spotted his friend An Yu-sung. A fight was now inevitable and the drug dealers charged in. Before they could land a single blow, the heroes were already taking them out of the fight. In the heat of battle, An Yu-sung even forgot they needed these guys alive. Lee Yuri triggered a freezing spell that coated the entire interior of the barn in ice. Her main target was Kang Hyun. She thought escaping would be easier once he was gone. An Yu-sung whispered to her that she would not be able to kill him that easily. He calmly walked past her and shattered the block of ice holding the hero. Lee Yuri watched in horror as her trump card failed to have any real effect. Left with no other options, she ordered everyone to take the new drug. Although her subordinates resisted at first because of the side effects, they eventually gave in to her commands. Their eyes instantly filled with blood and their muscles swelled up before everyone's eyes. Kang Hyun wanted to attack them right away, but An Yu-sung stopped him. The madman wanted the enemy to reach their full power before he slaughtered them. But the hero just wanted to finish off these bastards as quickly as possible. Out of nowhere, one of the juiced-up goons actually held his own and stopped Kang Hyun's strike. He even managed to punch the guy back about 20 meters. An Yu-sung, on the other hand, treated the whole fight like a game and mostly just messed around while dodging. But once he flipped the switch and got serious, the dealers started dropping like flies. To make matters worse for the bad guys, Shin Sona showed up with her bow and started picking them off right when things got messy. By the time the dust settled, only 3 of the scumbags were left standing. Having pushed his skills this far already, Kang Hyun saw no point in holding back his true power anymore. By sunrise, the entire barn looked like a war zone, and Shin Tae-gil rolled up to the ruins to figure out what the hell happened. When the man reminded them that the original plan was a sting and not a slaughter, the heroes pointed out their one and only survivor. It was Lee Yuri, whom they had buried up to her neck in the dirt. He had regretted teaming up with these lunatics more than once, but he could not argue with the results. They hauled the girl off to a black site for interrogation. At first she went full stone wall, refusing to give up a single name or answer any of Shin Tae-gil's questions. The only thing she would admit to was her fanatical faith in Choi Min-jun, and her belief that he was going to change the world for the better. Since she was clearly done talking through normal channels, he realized he had no choice but to call in some specialized persuasion methods. By evening, Choi Min-jun already knew the fate of the squad sent to meet the new buyers. Since the government had captured Lee Yuri, it was only a matter of time before they found the main base. Once again, that brat Kang Hyun was interfering with his plans. He had to be eliminated, and the blonde mastermind had just the right card in his deck. The next day at the Badass Guild, the hero was busy leveling up his poison resistance by consuming toxins. He already had the basic level of the skill. He never would have gained access to these substances without government help. Suddenly the hero got a call. Sean Youngo from the Awakened Alliance invited him to meet and discuss some urgent business. At first Kang Hyun was not interested, since he wanted to focus on his training. But once the guy mentioned a free meal, no further convincing was needed. Sean Youngo was as smiley as ever when they met. But Kang Hyun noticed the man had been missing from recent guild meetings and raids. He reluctantly admitted he was only level 3 and mostly did administrative work. The restaurant was very luxurious, and they had a private VIP room to talk. Beer was served with the meat. Kang Hyun was having a great time until he tried to remember the important business they were supposed to discuss. Suddenly his head began to spin. Foam and blood poured from his mouth, and breathing became impossible. Sean Youngo did not even move. The fake restaurant staff picked up the hero, while the man with a smile reported to Choi Min-jun that the plan was a success and the target would soon be eliminated manually. The man was convinced that Kang Hyun was already a corpse. He left the body to his goons so they could have their sick fun before disposing of the remains. Total creeps. They were useless in a real fight, but they were pros at dismembering targets and scrubbing evidence. Sean Youngo started to walk away since he hated watching them work, but suddenly a hand clamped down on him. The shock nearly killed him when he realized it was Kang Hyun. He didn't even have time to put 2 and 2 together before the hero's fist connected with his face. After a thorough session of venting his frustration on Sean Youngo's face, it was time for questions. The man was stunned that the hero had figured out the poisoning attempt. According to his intel, the guy was not supposed to be smart enough to catch on, but he was dead wrong. Kang Hyun had smelled a rat the moment he heard the man claim to be level 3 when his aura clearly screamed he was over level 50. Despite the chaos, Kang Hyun just wanted to enjoy some untainted meat, even as the man tried to apologize and cut a deal. But the hero was smart enough not to negotiate with terrorists, especially with how hard Sean Youngo tried to preach about their righteous cause and some ticking clock. He was beyond annoying. Since his appetite was ruined, the hero decided to start carving information out of the man one finger at a time. But the guy refused to break and bit down on a hidden poison capsule in his mouth. The effect was instant. He started twitching and foam sprayed from his lips. A few seconds later, there was nothing left on the chair but a useless corpse. What a waste. Kang Hyun headed outside and pedestrians scrambled to get away from his blood-soaked clothes. At least it was clear Sean Youngo was not talking about a countdown for Earth's safety, but some internal threat to the country. Putting the guesswork aside, Kang Hyun was surprised to see 23 missed calls from Shin Tae-gil. The man sounded like he was having a total nervous breakdown over the phone and demanded that Kang Hyun get to the office immediately. It was not just a random check-in. A few days ago, the government had tracked down a terrorist hideout and sent a special ops team to clear it. A single person had wiped them all out in seconds. Within 10 minutes, Kang Hyun was being escorted into the secret office. Despite all the security measures, Shin Tae-gil was still a nervous wreck that the hero would pull some new stunt. You couldn't really blame the man. The situation was dead serious, considering even the president had to get involved. Naturally, all the generals and high-ranking politicians were baffled that a single strange kid was brought in to save them. The military brass even started mocking Shin Tae-gil despite their own recent embarrassing failure. The president took the man's side because the times had clearly changed. Regular people just could not compete with the awakened anymore. It was obvious these fossils did not care about the crisis and were only obsessed with clawing back their lost influence. After listening to their nonsense for too long, Kang Hyun snapped. He did not hold back and told them exactly what he thought. He shredded them for their behavior and their brainless decisions that sent good people to certain death. Finally, the hero refused to take part in the farce and demanded a private meeting with the president without these jokes in the room. Shin Tae-gil was shocked, but he also felt like he could finally breathe after that performance. A deathly silence hit the office for a second before erupting into a chaotic mess of shouting about the brat's disrespect. But the president just found the whole thing hilarious. The next day, Kang Hyun decided to pester An Yusung into a spar. The catch was, they had to turn off all special skills and stat buffs. With rumors of the strongest awakened lurking out there, he needed to sharpen his raw combat techniques. But the blonde guy flat out refused because he thought it would be boring. In his eyes, Kang Hyun without his skills was just an unimaginably weak opponent. Naturally, that hit the hero right where it hurt. An Yu-sung offered a deal to make it worth his while. If Kang Hyun won, he got a free wish. But if the blonde won, they would start production on version 2 of the inimitable leader action figure. To settle their dispute, they headed to a dungeon called the Shrew Abode. The monsters there were nocturnal, so the guild owning the dungeon rented the place out during the day for group drills and dangerous technique practice. There was usually a steep fee, but after some very persuasive negotiations, the badass guild got the keys for free. Everything was set to finally decide who was top dog. At the signal, they both lunged into the fray. Kang Hyun threw the first strike, but An Yu-sung dodged with ease and countered with a high kick to the face. Because Kang Hyun's swings were too wide, the blonde could predict the timing perfectly. He followed up with his mace and snapped the hero's forearm. Under the rules, Kang Hyun could not use his regeneration, but he did not seem to care as he swung his sword again. An Yu-sung barely looked like he was trying as he dodged and explained exactly why the guild leader's strikes would never land. Finally, he parried a heavy swing, causing Kang Hyun to lose his rhythm, and used a short sword to slash the hero's face and disarm him. It looked like the winner was decided, but the hero refused to quit. Just like with the sword, An Yu-sung easily evaded a desperate fist. He then threw a handful of dirt into Kang Hyun's eyes and finished the duel with a single brutal kick to the groin. With the win secured, An Yu-sung could barely hide his grin. He now had total creative control over the next action figure. He did not waste time and designed a version of Kang Hyun in a very provocative pose. But the hero was not about to just sit there and take the loss. He realized his raw technique was still a weakness. He decided to head to a legendary dungeon called the Night Training Ground, which was famous for monsters that possessed actual sword skills. Kang Hyun was determined to grind his sword mastery there. No one would have guessed he would end up learning swordsmanship from a goblin, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The best among the tribe was a goblin named Kurgo. He had no idea that the stranger appearing before him would become the most traumatic acquaintance of his entire life. People usually think of goblins as mindless savages who somehow stumbled into building a civilization. But Kang Hyun was genuinely impressed by Kurgo's skills compared to the rest of the tribe. Even so, he was still confident he could win through sheer strength and endurance. However, he did not come for a win. He came to learn. He deactivated every buff and defense to focus purely on his blade work. It was a massive wake-up call when he could not even last 5 minutes without being shredded. The goblin recognized him as a formidable foe and moved in for the kill. But then the hero stood back up like nothing happened, healed his wounds, and demanded a rematch. While he was busy pestering the goblin, An Yu-sung and Shin Sona were clearing a different dungeon. Instead of flesh and blood monsters, they were up against ghosts in suits of armor. As usual, the girl took the long-range position, but her effectiveness started to tank because of the heavy mana cost. She decided to try her hand at close-quarters combat and pulled out a light dagger. She dropped the first enemy quickly enough, but she was out of her element and forgot to scan her surroundings. She almost became a ghost herself before An Yu-sung stepped in to save her. Before long, the two of them successfully wiped the dungeon clean while Kang Hyun continued to haunt the poor goblin Kurgo. The monster was in absolute terror. No matter how many times he hacked the human to pieces, the guy just regenerated with horrifying speed and lunged back into the fight. Despite his knightly oath, Kurgo was ready to quit. But then Kang Hyun suddenly lowered his weapon and tried to introduce himself. The guy thanked the monster for the help and promised to be back tomorrow. Kurgo was overjoyed, not because he understood the lunatic's words, but because he desperately hoped he was never coming back. The next day, the hero decided to test his luck again and challenged An Yu-sung to a rematch under the same strict conditions as before. This time, the action figure collection grew by yet another specimen. While the youngsters were having their fun, Shin Taegul was busy digging through the remains of the terrorist attacks and sorting every scrap of intel. The followers they had captured were practically brainwashed. They kept babbling about some higher purpose, but frustratingly refused to get into the specifics. It was still a total mystery what Choi Min-jun was actually planning for his endgame. Meanwhile, Kang Hyun was not backing down. He was still determined to squeeze some kind of revelation out of the goblin about why his raw strength was failing him in a real fight. The language barrier was definitely the main issue, though. While the hero was having a deep philosophical crisis about his lack of technique, Kurgo was just sitting there thinking about how incredibly ugly this human was. Their chatter eventually devolved into another duel which ended the same way as always. No matter what he tried, Kang Hyun just could not secure a win without his skills. Finally, the hero left to handle other business, leaving the goblin alone with the crushing promise of a return visit. The next few rematches with An Yu-sung were a disaster for the hero's ego. The action figure collection grew by 2 more versions, and Kang Hyun was starting to spiral. He began to think he had zero natural talent, and was worthless without his system buffs. That night, the goblin tribe decided they had seen enough of Kurgo's strange friendship with the human. The innate hatred for mankind burned deep in their souls, and Kurgos' actions were a betrayal they could not ignore. The elders decided to exile him from the fortress, but Kurgo did not earn the title of strongest knight for nothing. He was forced to slaughter everyone who turned against him. Trapped in a pit of absolute despair from the bloodbath, he shattered the limits of his own power. The next day, Kanghyun strolled into the dungeon expecting the usual routine, but he was met with a heavy graveyard silence. As he pushed deeper, he felt a crushing wave of mana radiating from Kurgo. Something fundamental had shifted in the night during the night. Without a single word, the goblin lunged, and the force of the impact was so violent that the durability of Kanghyun's sword plummeted by over 100 units in an instant. At that rate, the blade would be scrap metal in minutes, so he stashed it in his inventory and decided to focus on dodging until the monster tired itself out. But Kurgo was transformed. He was faster and more fluid than ever, and in a fit of pure rage, he managed to land a devastating blow. Kanghyun was barely hanging on, and only his memory of the goblin's previous fighting patterns kept him alive. It was only a matter of time before the monster adapted. Faced with that level of bloodlust, the hero realized he had to break the rules. He activated every single buff and slammed his fist into Kurgo's face with everything he had. After a brutal beatdown, he finally managed to knock some sense back into the goblin. Kurgo eventually conceded, but the fight had given Kanghyun the answer he was looking for. It was not a system skill. He had felt the way the goblin moved mana directly through his weapon. When Kanghyun tried to mimic the technique on the spot, Kurgo fell into despair. The monster had slaughtered his entire tribe to unlock that power, and the human had just copied it by watching. Armed with new confidence, the hero called for a rematch with An Yusung the next day. They returned to the shrew abode, while the rest of the guild and a crowd of online lurkers placed bets on the next embarrassing action figure. The blonde already had a sketch ready for the manufacturer, but Kanghyun was done losing. They charged at each other, and after a few exchanges, An Yusung realized the game had changed. By circulating energy through his body and weapon, Kanghyun could now read his opponent's movements before they even happened. An Yusung could not land a single hit. In one swift motion, Kanghyun disarmed him completely. The blonde immediately accused him of cheating with a skill, but eventually had to admit that he would have felt the system activate if that were the case. As agreed, it was An Yusung's turn to hit the assembly line. The hero did not expect the internet and the fans to embrace the new figure with such overwhelming warmth, especially compared to the mixed reactions his own provocative dolls had received.